The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with the bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place of the planet as New Zealand can happen such bloody tragedies. After all, New Zealand is first of all a picturesque nature with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Auckland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Carmen and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987 in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, Carmen completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Carmen was a loyal friend and comrade for many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in the store as a marketer, and in her spare time she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her strange choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary and even more so undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients. It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callahan. Bradford James Joseph Callahan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly, and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant, and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and a measured course of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Carmen and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years they parted. but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to keep a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and wanting to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Auckland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as she could. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009 he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services in the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he in turn simply ignored the requests of the former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly reflected on the alimony, which he paid under the agreement Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The police officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. The relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party in the bayonet and with aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a number of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement to pay child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Thomas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman from video camera images and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink and shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash can and an overturned fabric horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands, and upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help, and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was found luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase on some of the things were found traces of blood. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment, an envelope with Misty's name on it and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding traces of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Auckland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing, but the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, they discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not found connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house, and that a neighbor had seen through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? The police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining his bank card details and traced his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callahan brought a meat cleaver and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events that did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list. It turned out that on one workday, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around the property for a long time. It was strange, but not so strange that the workers who saw him would start reporting anyone about such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callahan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callahan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to change the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and is scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. Brad thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he threw several punches again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment, and that he would not be able to get back everything that was, but it did not upset him at all, because by such an act he had solved his main problem, and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callahan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside a supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went back into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Oahu Bay, near downtown Auckland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body, but an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Carmen Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, a private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Wenning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Wenning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was newly charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callahan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callahan dismembered Miss Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Auckland when Bradford Callahan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callahan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal, but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Venning sentenced Brad Callahan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callahan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences are to be served concurrently. Judge Venning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callahan to justice. Mr. Callahan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on 2 families, said Detective Inspector Mark Benefield. Callahan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Mark Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Mark Benefield, during the interview, explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, we have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court, said Mark Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callahan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did. For the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. We will never forgive him for what he did to our family, said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers, added her stepfather Wayne. Callahan's attorney, Stuart Grieve, said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing, we are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and uncontrollable anger, a person can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callahan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out because it wasn't his fault. Absurd. Lovers or innocent victims? On April 7, 2024, the Mrs. Buryatia beauty pageant was held in Ulan-Ude, Republic of Buryatia, Russia. Seseg Buinova, a 30-year-old mother of 2 children, received the nomination Mrs. Top Model in it. Instantly famous throughout the country, the woman also quickly disappeared from view. Literally. 4 days later, the finalist went missing, and for 4 months, nothing has been heard from her. Investigators, relatives, and just concerned citizens have been knocked down in their attempts to find the missing woman. However, the further the investigation progresses, the more questions arise. Mysterious disappearance has given rise to many versions and creepy speculations. Today, together with you, we'll try to touch the mysteries of the investigation and figure out where the beauty queen of eastern Siberia disappeared. Mysterious disappearance. April 11th, Seseg called her husband Boris, who was on a business trip, and asked to send money for groceries. After that, she informed him that she would be doing household chores. Her husband was convinced that this would be the case, but the woman decided otherwise. That evening, she decided to earn some money on her own. From time to time, Seseg moonlighted as a cab driver in her Mitsubishi Outlander. Despite the numerous earnings, the money was still not enough. Her spouse did not like this way of earning money, especially when she was taxiing at late hours. However, the wife assured that everything was fine and she was in no danger. At 8 USR p.m., Seseg left the house, and an hour and a half later she was free. At around 10 p.m., the young woman met with her friends to have coffee together. After a short conversation, the acquaintances went home. Seseg Buinova said she would also go home to her children. She called the boys and warned them that she would be there soon. However, her words did not come true. Instead, the woman drove up to the Absolute shopping center, where a young man got into her car. CCTV cameras recorded that the two stayed in the car for about an hour. A time later, a third man joined them. The car then drove out of the parking lot toward the 100th block. After that, Seseg did not return home. Moreover, later it became known that a certain Stanislav Norboev disappeared with her. Beautiful Seseg. Darmayeva Seseg Balzinimayevna was born on July 8, 1993 in the small village of Tashir, Selenginsky district, Republic of Buryatia. There is little information about her early age. However, one thing is indisputable. The girl grew up very active. She loved to dance and do sports, especially singled out volleyball. It was this sport that instilled in her iron discipline and the will to win. Having received secondary education, the girl moved to the capital, where she entered the Buryat State University. In 2015, she successfully graduated from the educational institution. After, the enterprising person registered as an individual entrepreneur and became a specialist in eyelash extensions. To this day, on the expanses of the internet, there are still ads in which she advertises her services and invites to the procedure. Having studied the profitable directions in business, in December 2022, Seseg opened a children's clothing store, and in her spare time, she started moonlighting as a private carriage driver. As for her personal life, everything is as transparent as possible. Seseg shared important moments in social networks. Even during her student years, Darmayeva married and became Buinova. The marriage gave birth to 2 beautiful boys, Kirill and Alexander. In 2024, the children turned 9 and 8 years old, respectively. The young woman was a wonderful mother. She brought up her children in love and care. Her husband Boris did not often glimpsed in joint photos, perhaps because he did not like to be photographed. According to the latest information, he worked in the organization for catching stray dogs. He was a former law enforcement officer. Many people speak favorably of him. He loved his creative wife and supported in everything. They even say that the couple never quarreled. At least, no one saw it. In her posts, Buinova talked about visiting Moscow, St. Petersburg, Turkey, Thailand, and Cuba, supporting the information with colorful photos. The young woman liked to dress stylishly, take care of herself, go to the gym, and have fun. She was often seen in local restaurants, clubs, and karaoke bars. At the same time, she behaved with dignity. She just liked the beautiful life and social gloss. Buinova knew how to present herself, always wore fashionable clothes, beautiful makeup, often arranged professional photo shoots. Mrs. Top Model. One day, a young woman decided to take part in a national beauty contest. Having easily passed the qualifying stage, Seseg found herself among the contestants. During the 2-month preparation, she shared everything in her account, covering, so to speak, behind-the-scenes secrets, masterclasses, trainings, and so on. Finally, on April 7th, the final of the contest took place. On the stage, the contestant tried to show herself and her talent as much as possible. She even fulfilled a childhood dream by singing in front of a large audience. "I am my family, my husband and my children, my relatives who are always near and support me in all endeavors. I rejoice in life, every new day, and believe that each of us should be happy and fill this life with bright emotions. For me, happiness is my family. Every day, they give me new emotions, smiles, their love and warmth," Seseg confessed during her performance. According to the results of the contest, the jury unanimously awarded her the title Mrs. Top Model. Seseg expected that participation in such an event would be the beginning of her path in the modeling business. However, a few days later, she disappeared without a trace. During this time, the flowers given at the event did not even have time to wilt. First clues. The news of the beauty queen's disappearance spread quickly. The first to sound the alarm was her husband, who at that time was in Khabarovsk. On April 12th, he threw Seseg a few photos from the trip, but she did not respond. During the day, he did not hear from her. After that, he called his mother-in-law and asked her to go to their house. The village of Gorky was located on the outskirts of Ulan-Ude. As it turned out, the children were left alone, and Seseg had not been there since yesterday evening. Having heard the bad news, Oris immediately flew to Irkutsk, from where he left by car. On the morning of April 14th, he was already there. By that time, Seseg's relatives reported to the police. Law enforcement officers did not hesitate and quickly organized a search operation. They were joined by volunteers from the specialized search and rescue team, Liza Alert. On the evening of April 12th, Buinova was posted on social networks. While specialists were busy establishing the route of the missing woman, leaflets were distributed all over the city and information was collected. In total, more than 500 people were involved. Many places were combed. Vakmistrovo, Medvedchikovo settlement, 100th micro-districts, forests, and riverbanks. However, the first clues were found on the territory of the industrial zone. Exploring the area around, volunteers noticed a mattress, and under it men's and women's belongings. Bloodstains were visible on the grass next to them. Specifically, they found a woman's black tights, a man's and woman's jacket, a t-shirt, men's underwear, and a gym bag. In the pocket of the man's jacket were keys to a Nissan car and keys to an apartment, as well as a driver's license in the name of 26-year-old Stanislav Norboev. It is noteworthy that at that time the people who found his personal belongings did not know that he had disappeared together with Seseg. None of his relatives suspected it, so Nadezhda Boldanova, Stanislav's sister, learned the terrible news about her brother, Stanislav Norboev. When the name of the young man unexpectedly surfaced in the investigation, Stanislav's mother was shocked. She said that she saw her son on the evening of April 11th. He stopped by her house to have dinner. After that, he received a phone call and left. The guy did not say who called, but he was in an upbeat mood. He said that he would go to his apartment and get some sleep. Stas's mother noted that he initially came in work clothes. However, he soon changed his clothes and hurried away. He studied well, was cheerful. He graduated from the construction faculty of the East Siberian State University of Technology and Management. He was fond of soccer, served in the army, worked by profession in the road department. "My son has always been my support," Nina Norboeva said about him. People close to him characterized him as a calm and judicious person who led a healthy lifestyle and practiced sports. He had an extensive circle of friends. In early April of this year, Stanislav moved out from his mother to a rented apartment in the 100th block. The young man justified his decision by the fact that he wanted to build a new relationship and create a family. Otherwise, he did not tell anyone about his personal life. Points of contact. It soon became clear that Stanislav Norboev and Seseg Buinova did not meet by chance. Something linked the young people. but what exactly it was is not known. Relatives of the missing decided to find out how they were connected to each other. There are two versions of the story. Ekaterina, a friend of Seseg, said that they met about a week ago in a nightclub. Before the institution closed, the man invited Seseg, who liked him, to a slow dance. After he found Seseg Buinova in social networks and started flooding her with messages, Seseg confessed to her friend that she did not exchange contacts with him. However, Stanislav was stubborn and insisted on communication. In her interview, Catherine was perplexed. He knew that she was a married woman and had children. His behavior was alarming. Moreover, later it turned out that Seseg was not the only one to whom he wrote. Other women were also found. Relatives and acquaintances hastened to dispel all doubts about Stanislav. They made an official statement that Norboev is a good man who is not capable of kidnapping and even worse. At the same time, another close friend claimed that Seseg and Stanislav had met much earlier. Allegedly, they often crossed paths at training sessions as they both loved volleyball. From here comes another equally popular version that between them did arise romantic feelings, about which Boris soon learned. Allegedly, Seseg's husband could not survive the treason and decided to teach the unfaithful wife a lesson. Perhaps something did not go according to plan, so instead of scaring the lovers, he killed them. Either it was originally about ruthless revenge. This theory is explained by other facts, which you will learn later. However, perhaps this is why the investigation does not trust Boris and considers him the main suspect. In his interview, the man shared that the investigative committee does not want to work with him. They do not give me any information, not even regarding the conducted examinations. Nothing. For example, they found some earring, but at the same time did not notify me, did not invite me to the identification, complained Buinova. Also, the husband of the beauty queen reported that they seized the video from his phone. According to him, if he was really involved in the case, he was already definitely sitting behind bars. Who accuses me? It's their right, their understatement, he stated. The relatives of the missing woman say with one voice that they do not believe Boris is guilty. They rely on the fact that they had a lot of plans for the future. The couple was making repairs and dreamed of a third child, a girl. It must be said that as soon as Boris returned home, he immediately began an independent search. Familiar family members are sure that Boris is trying to vilify. Another find. Along with the things on the vacant lot in the grass were also found bloodstains. Later, it turned out that they belonged to Stanislav Norboev. A few days after the investigation began, Seseg's car was found. It was parked with twisted license plates in one of the yards. The resident of the apartment building number 60 on Stolbovaya Street reported about the strange car, similar in description to the one flashed on all news channels. It was not the first day that the woman had been watching him through the window. During all this time, the owner has not shown up. Buinova, who arrived on the spot, recognized his wife's car. However, it was empty. After inspection in the cabin were found sand, dust, and a small branch, as if the car had been in nature, for example, on a vacant lot. On the windows of the Mitsubishi and the driver's door from the inside, there were visible traces of blood, and in the trunk, there were removed license plates. After conducting a genetic examination, experts stated that the blood found belonged to none other than Seseg. Unfortunately, it was not possible to establish when exactly the vehicle was there. Therefore, the testimony of an eyewitness was taken as a basis. A picture of what happened. After the specialist studied the recordings from the video surveillance cameras, the picture of what happened began to emerge. At 08:52 p.m., according to the cab service, Seseg finished the last order on the route Barnaulskaya-Armavirskaya. At 08:57 p.m., she called her friend and proposed to meet. The women agreed to see each other near the Krona Flower Salon on Baltakanova Street. There, they got in touch with another friend and stopped by the cafe. After a friendly conversation, everyone went away. However, instead of heading home at 10:41 p.m., Buinova drove up to a shopping center located at 158 Babushkina Street. 4 minutes later, Stanislav Norboev drove up to her. After that, the man moved into a black Mitsubishi in which the young people stayed for about an hour. Then another man appeared out of nowhere. He joined them and they drove off in an unknown direction. At 12:19 at night, street cameras recorded the Mitsubishi at the intersection of Babushkina and Rincino streets. The vehicle was moving towards Domostroitelnaya Street. Further, their trail disappeared. In addition, the investigators managed to establish something else. At 12:44 a.m., Seseg visited her telegram for the last time, and an hour later, her car was speeding back at breakneck speed. On April 12th at 6:28 a.m., Buinova's cell phone was fixed at 5 Sakyanova Street. This address is not far from where Seseg's Mitsubishi was later found. New information. As new leads emerged, the possibility of finding the missing alive was melting before our eyes. But the main mystery, perhaps, is the identity of the third person who got into the car. Investigators are in no hurry to name him, but there are reports that he previously worked in the police. This version arose after the guards of the industrial area where the things were found earlier shed light on the ill-fated night. The drivers of passing trains noticed that around 1 a.m. there was a car in the vacant lot, and they saw a man near the railroad tracks. For safety reasons, they reported the matter to their superiors. Several guards then went to the location to investigate the situation. A man wearing a cap was driving the car. The men arrived and asked him what he was doing here. The latter replied that the car had stalled. He then showed his police identification card. When the guards decided to check the surrounding area, the car suddenly started and drove away. They later identified the vehicle in which the unknown man was sitting. It was Buinova's car. Unfortunately, they could not remember the appearance and the data given in the ID card. Employees of the industrial zone referred to the dark time of day and poor visibility. The fact that the mystery passenger was not simple was indicated by many things, including the place where the car was located. It turns out that he was standing in the blind spot from the nearest CCTV cameras. After a while, the popular show Malakoff on the television channel took up the investigation of the case. In the course of it sounded different versions of what happened. In the studio were present relatives of the missing and experts. However, the most important were unique footage from CCTV cameras, which were shown for the first time. They show how a car, similar to Seseg's car, drives into the vacant lot and stops. Then several people get out of it. Some movements resembling a fight begin. One of them falls down, the other pulls something large and long away from the car. Then, the man who was pulling something gets back into the car and drives away. However, 45 minutes later, he returns again. As time passed, 2 unknown men approached him, and then the headlights went out and the picture disappeared. Perhaps the released video will give a new twist to the tangled case, and there will be positive developments in it. Among other things, there are plenty of oddities in the disappearance of Seseg and Stanislav. On the night of April 11, 12, not far from where the evidence was found, outbuildings were burning. Some people believe it was not accidental. Someone intentionally committed arson to destroy all traces. In addition, the next day, unknown persons poured concrete on the place where Buinova's Mitsubishi with 3 passengers was supposedly located. One thing is clear. The case is covered with mystery, and someone deliberately prevents its disclosure. Why did the search stop? By April 17th, hundreds of volunteers combed Domostroitelnaya Street and the entire industrial zone, abandoned buildings, ravines and woodlands, hills and wastelands. Conducting searches in the water area of the river turned out to be problematic, as at that time the ice drift began. However, as much as possible, the search operation was carried out. At that moment, more than 2,000 leaflets were distributed all over Ulan-Ud. A huge number of people were questioned. However, as soon as concerned citizens from other regions started heading to the city, the search group, Liza Alert, announced the suspension of its activities. In their post on the social network, the leadership explained that their headquarters had done a tremendous amount of work in 5 days. "We do not finish our work," the text read. "The search for Seseg and Stanislav continues. We are waiting for new evidence, ready to process it, and go on autonomous tasks." During this time, several other items have been found in the investigation area that could conceivably belong to Seseg. Among them, women's boots, an e-cigarette, and a hat. However, at the moment of the finds, only a man's jacket with documents and keys have been officially confirmed. Apparently, the other things have nothing to do with the case or information about them is not disclosed. Volunteers noted that there is a lot of garbage and miscellaneous junk on the vacant lot, which makes the inspection much more difficult. The search for Seseg Buinova and Stanislav Norboev continues to this day, but by relatives. The relatives of the missing have joined their efforts, despite the suspicions that have arisen about Stanislav. Families and their acquaintances take to the streets after working hours and on weekends. There are about 10 of us. Strangers are calling, interested in the results, worried, offering help. Now law enforcers, family, and friends are doing it. Of course, we would like to once again gather volunteers and walk the place. The children are waiting for their mom. They don't know what happened. So far, we have told them that mom has left, shared Svetlana Mitipova, Seseg's aunt. Nina Norboeva said that she feels that her son is alive. The woman stated that she would believe it until she was convinced otherwise. The silence was interrupted. It is striking that after the public outcry, there is a sharp silence. People are perplexed and speculate why the Liza Alert Squad, after finding important leads, quickly called off the search. And afterward, they closed comments to posts about Seseg, explaining it with ethical considerations. In the first week, hundreds of people dropped what they were doing and took to the streets in search of the missing. Understandably, they were extremely outraged and waited for some kind of explanation. Finally, on May 29th, the authorities broke the silence and made an official statement. They reported that murder is being considered as the main version. The suspect is the person who got into Seseg's car near the shopping center. Work is underway to improve the quality of the video footage to identify the person. Otherwise, investigative operative search and search activities continue in the criminal case. Evidence in the case. Thus, at this point in the case of Seseg and Stanislav's disappearance, there are the following official leads. First, the items found in the vacant lot: Norboev's jacket, keys, and driver's license. The second lead is other items, the identity of which is not known. The third clue is a large bloodstain found there. The fourth lead is a woman's car left in the yard with no license plates and bloodstains. The fifth clue is the CCTV footage, which shows the route of the Mitsubishi on the night of April 11th, 12. And finally, the sixth lead is the testimony of witnesses and eyewitnesses. Forensic and genomic tests are being conducted on the available evidence. No further information is available. Versions. The main theory is murder. The first person who comes to mind is Boris Buinov. He may well have been involved in the massacre, and the infidelity of his wife could be the motive for the crime. But this is just speculation. Seseg's relatives reported that they did not find any compromising correspondence in Seseg's computer. Boris admitted that he had been questioned by investigators more than once and passed a polygraph. At the same time, many circumstances raised doubts. First of all, Boris's work in law enforcement agencies in the past. We remember that the unknown man showed his service ID and could well be a former colleague of the suspect. Secondly, Buinov's strange business trip on the day of his wife's disappearance, 1,500 miles away. It is as if he took care of his alibi in advance. The second issue is the questionable nature of the trip itself regarding the capture of stray dogs, especially over such a long distance. Thirdly, Buinova's expensive automobile was not destroyed, and after all, it is a jointly acquired property, and in case of what it will always be able to dispose of the second spouse. The second version is kidnapping. Allegedly, Stanislav fell so much in love with a woman who did not reciprocate that he stole her. However, this raises many questions. Who was the third person in the car, and for what purpose? Is Seseg alive at this point, and if so, where is she? The next theory is a criminal showdown over debts. It is possible that at one time the woman sought financial help from people with a criminal lifestyle, perhaps to build a business or maybe in preparation for a beauty pageant. When the time came to pay off her debts, something went wrong. Hence, Seseg's desire to moonlight as a cab driver. Also, on the day she disappeared, she asked her husband for some money. Obviously, it was a small amount, but there is a possibility that she was collecting the necessary amount. that would explain Stanislav's presence in Buinova's car. Perhaps she did not tell Boris about her problems, but invited an athlete she knew to the meeting as a defense. In that case, killing them is illogical and rather wrong. It is important for the creditor to fulfill the debtor's obligations, even if overdue. The fourth version is the most banal, but it is quite possible. Seseg and Stanislav could have encountered an inadequate traveling companion, especially after the contest Mrs. Buryatia 2024, the woman was widely known. The criminal could have been her secret admirer who put his sick fantasy into practice. There is another version of events. What if the two lovers simply ran away and, to be forgotten in time, were forced to stage a crime? Although it is unlikely that the young people would go for such a thing. Seseg had children she would never abandon. Stanislav had a mother and a sister. There are few people willing to build their happiness on the misfortune of others, instead of the bottom line. As we can see, there are many versions of events. It is possible that over time, in the case of Buinova and Norboev, something will become clearer. However, it may also happen that we will never know what really happened. However, this investigation has brought us a little closer to solving a very strange disappearance. And what do you think was the cause of the terrible events of April night in Ulan Ude? The case of Luz Maria Lopez, from love to violent crime. The crime rate in Guatemala is extremely high. According to statistics, at least 100 crimes are committed here per week, half of which are so-called domestic crimes, and almost 70% of serious crimes remain unsolved. According to The New Yorker, fewer civilians died in the Iraq war zone in 2009 than in Guatemala. It was in this beautiful but dangerous country that the tragic events that will be discussed today took place. The story of an attractive young woman named Luz Maria Lopez started out romantic and promising, but ended up as a handful of ashes in a bag thrown down a sewer manhole. She was victimized by a domestic tyrant whom she herself spent years forgiving over and over again, giving him a chance to mend his ways. There was a lot of controversy in this case, and the perpetrator could have avoided responsibility, but let's go over everything in order. Who is Luz Maria Lopez? The full name of our today's heroine, given to her at birth, sounds like Luz Maria del Rocio Morales Lopez. She was born in 1995, March 17th, in the small town of San Cristobal Verapaz, in a simple and rather modest family of Ada Morales and Brian Lopez. Luz Maria was the youngest of two children of her parents and was raised with her older brother Omar. As an infant, the girl nearly died due to an intestinal obstruction. To save her life, a complex operation was performed, and doctors gave no guarantees. But the baby's mother prayed for her recovery and believed that her daughter would recover. So soon it happened, and the surgery itself at such an early age, fortunately did not affect the development of the girl. During her school years, Luz Maria was actively engaged in sports, in particular, attended sections of gymnastics and athletics, and was also fond of classical choreography. She was a creative person, easily found a common language with different people and quickly made friends. The girl also studied well and had an aptitude for the humanities. After graduating from school, Luz Maria thought about getting a higher education and decided to enter a prestigious state university. She chose law and later decided to specialize in criminalistics because this direction has always aroused her genuine interest. A fateful encounter. When Luz Maria was a student, she and her mother visited a car dealership in Coban, the capital of Alta Verapaz. It was her older brother's 25th birthday that year, and her parents and sister wanted to give him a special gift, a motorcycle, which he had long dreamed of. In the showroom, they were met by a polite and very attentive young consultant who introduced himself as Jorge. He showed the buyers the whole assortment and gave some recommendations. Mother and daughter chose a model, but decided to think more and consult with the head of the family. Leaving, they took a business card of the car dealership, and also Luz Maria left her phone number for feedback. Soon the girl received a call from Jorge, the same consultant from the salon, but the conversation was not about the upcoming purchase, but was more of a personal nature. After that, Jorge dialed Luz Maria's number several more times before he dared to ask her out to a coffee shop. It was obvious that he liked the beautiful, sultry brunette very much, but he did not know where to begin the acquaintance. It should be noted that Luz Maria also liked this handsome young man, so on his proposal to meet, she responded with consent. The guy was a year younger than her, but such a small difference in age was not an obstacle for them. Almost immediately, a romantic relationship began between them, which developed rapidly. Both felt that it was true love at first sight and believed that a long and happy life was ahead of them. After only a few months, the couple decided to live together, and although their parents did not approve of such a rush, the young people were soon married. About 6 months later, the lovers played a wedding, inviting only the closest people to the celebration. Curiously, the problems began on the day of the wedding, when the institution where the banquet was to be held, there was a hitch because of which the holiday was almost derailed. The couple had to overpay a considerable amount of money so that the wedding, after all, took place at the appointed time. Who is Jorge? About who was the chosen one of Luz Maria, there is very little information in the public domain. It is known that he was born in 1996 in the town of Santa Catalina La Tinta, which is in the central part of Guatemala. Jorge was the eldest of 2 sons and was raised with his brother Pablo. His family balanced on the brink of poverty, so that the boys as children were not spoiled with beautiful clothes and expensive toys, because the money was enough only for the bare necessities. But Jorge somehow did not aspire to a better life, so he did not bother to study and look for a decent job. The young man, as they say, just went with the flow. People who knew Jorge personally spoke about him as a withdrawn, uncommunicative, and sometimes aggressive guy. He really had problems with controlling emotions, because of which Jorge did not have many friends and poorly formed relationships with the opposite sex. Nevertheless, when he met the girl of his dreams, he made every effort to win her love, and then he was in a hurry to get married, fearing that she might change her mind. By the way, the parents of Luz Maria from the very beginning treated her son-in-law with suspicion. There was something about this young man they definitely did not like, but they could not say what it was and could not dissuade their daughter from marrying him. An unhappy marriage. Soon after the wedding, the young wife became pregnant, but since she had not yet managed to get a university degree, she could not find a good job. No one wanted to take a girl with no experience who was in an interesting position, so she had to make do with casual labor. Her husband by that time had lost his job, but was in no hurry to burden himself with a new occupation. When the couple had a daughter, who was named Alice, with money in the family was quite tight. Both spouses were unemployed. They had no money, not only to pay for rented housing, but even to buy food and the most basic things needed in the household. Then Jorge convinced his wife that the only way out for them would be to temporarily move to live in his parents' house. Luz Maria refused for a long time, but since they had no choice, and they could not stay on the street with a baby in their arms, the young woman eventually agreed. Ada knew about the problems in her daughter's family, and repeatedly persuaded her to return to her native home, but she persisted in saying that everything would soon get better with her husband, and there was no reason to worry. One day the mother decided to visit her daughter and granddaughter, but coming to the house of her son-in-law's parents, found there a frightening picture. Luz Maria was in a deplorable state. She ate only once a day and then a little. Jorge's family did not think it necessary to feed their unemployed daughter-in-law. Luz Maria was breastfeeding her young daughter, so malnutrition could affect not only her health, but also the health of the child. However, the meager food was only a small part of all the troubles and problems Luz Maria faced in her mother-in-law's home. As it turned out, there she was constantly humiliated and even beaten by her husband's younger brother. This guy was annoyed by the crying of the child, as well as the presence of children's things in the house, so much so that he repeatedly threw them at Luz Maria, and once again launched a baby bottle at her and hit little Alice, who was in her mother's arms. Jorge saw all this, but never once stood up for his wife and daughter, and acted as if they were strangers to him. Ada convinced her daughter to take her granddaughter and return to her parents' house, But soon, Jorge appeared on their doorstep, asking his wife to return and promising to get a job. She agreed, but only after the young people were able to rent an apartment and live separately from Jorge's parents. When Luz Maria defended her diploma, she was able to fulfill her longtime dream and got a job in the city prosecutor's office. A smart, talented, and very responsible young woman, she quickly gained the respect of her colleagues and gradually began to move up the career ladder. Over time, the family's financial situation improved considerably, so much so that the couple could afford to buy a car for two. However, this was solely the merit of the wife, who worked hard, spared no expense, and was well regarded by her superiors. Jorge was still in search of himself and preferred to live at the expense of his wife, jealous, lazy, and a domestic tyrant. The young husband had an explosive temper, and the situation only worsened with time. He did not want to work, interrupted by temporary part-time jobs, and even then, not often. He preferred to sit at home in front of the TV, drinking beer with friends and spending what his wife earned. In addition, Jorge was pathologically jealous and tried to control every move of his beloved. He did not allow her to make friends, to have lunch with colleagues in cafes, or just to be somewhere without him. He constantly checked her phone, looked at the history of calls and read messages, and also forbade her to register accounts in social networks. At home, when left alone, the husband behaved no better. He made scandals in the middle of nowhere, constantly clarified relations, and always blamed his wife for all the problems and family troubles. When they lived in the house of his parents, Jorge never stood up for his wife and just watched how she humiliated, insulted, and sometimes even beat his relatives. Jorge himself also occasionally gave the will of his fists and did not see anything wrong in it. He treated Luz Maria as his property, believing that she would endure everything and would not go anywhere from him. Neighbors often heard the screams coming from the house of the couple, as well as saw on the face and body of the young woman signs of beatings. Repeatedly, Lopez tried to leave her husband and wanted to file for divorce. She several times took her daughter and moved out of the rented apartment in the house of her parents, but her husband every time came there and literally on his knees begged her forgiveness. And each time Luz Maria forgave him, giving him another chance, even though her parents asked her to come to her senses and leave this abusive man. On December 15, 2020, after another fight with manhandling, Luz Maria took 3-year-old Alice, got into the car, and came to her mother in tears. A day later, Jorge arrived there, and it was unclear whether he wanted his wife or the car back. He said that he had found a job, and now their lives would change, and he also swore that he would never raise a hand on his wife again in his life. Surprisingly, Luz Maria believed him again and went with her husband to their rented apartment. In mid-January 2021, Luz Maria called her mother to complain that her husband had not only failed to get a job as promised, but had also stolen the money she had earned, effectively leaving the family destitute. Ada felt sorry for her daughter and said she would give her some money so that she and her granddaughter would have enough for everything they needed until her daughter received her salary. The women agreed to meet on the morning of January 19th, but Luz Maria did not arrive at the appointed time. Moreover, she did not answer phone calls and messages, which was unusual for her. Concerned, Ada decided to go to her daughter's workplace the next day, but there she learned that Luz Maria had not shown up for the second day and that no one had been able to contact her. At the same time, Jorge, who was also looking for his wife, arrived at the prosecutor's office. According to him, they had once again quarreled, and he thought that Luz Maria had gone to her mother's house and was not answering her calls because she was offended by him. Ada immediately sensed something wrong and assumed that her son-in-law was lying, so she went straight to the police so that the search for Luz Maria could begin as soon as possible. That same day, an alert system was announced nationwide under the code name Isabel Claudina. In the original, Alerta Isabel Claudina. This meant an emergency search for a young woman reported missing. When the massive search began, the missing woman's husband was the first person to be named as a suspect, although it would be more accurate to say that he was the only suspect in the case. Luz Maria had no enemies. There was no reason to believe that she had been kidnapped, and the last person who saw her alive was Jorge. Naturally, this guy denied his involvement in the case, claiming that he himself was knocked down in search of his wife, and now extremely indignant and annoyed by the fact that he became the main suspect. At the same time, he himself was constantly confused in his testimony and could not clearly explain why he did not inform the police about the disappearance on the day of his wife's disappearance. And if he thought that she was at his mother-in-law's house, why he did not call or go there. While the police were searching for witnesses and combing the area, the body of the missing Luz Maria was accidentally discovered by municipal workers. On January 22nd, several workers arrived to a call about a clogged storm drain near the road. When they lifted the grate, they saw a strange large plastic bag with something black in it. As they looked closer, they realized that what they were looking at were charred human remains. They immediately reported the gruesome discovery to the police, and the police officers who arrived suggested that the body found could be that of Luz Maria Lopez, who is wanted all over the country. Forensic experts confirmed that the remains belonged to a young woman and her parents and brother at the identification, despite the fact that the body was badly disfigured by fire, confirmed with certainty that it was her. It is noteworthy that the package was found on the same street where the building of the prosecutor's office, where the deceased worked, was located, except that there were no surveillance cameras as well as lighting in that place. Despite the fact that the body was badly burned, pathologists were able to establish that the woman was severely beaten and the cause of her death was asphyxia. This was evidenced by internal hemorrhages, several fractures sustained while she was still alive, and particles of caked blood in her nose and mouth. There were deep marks on her neck indicating strangulation. It's a strange message. At the time of the discovery of the body, no new suspects had emerged in the case, and the victim's parents had no doubt that it was the son-in-law who had so brutally murdered their daughter. Jorge was immediately taken into custody, and the motive for his heinous act was being investigated. Also, psychologists-criminalists had to analyze in detail this marriage and the relationships formed within the family. At the investigation, Ada Lopez provided a frightening audio recording, which was sent to her anonymously by someone who lived in the neighborhood with her daughter and son-in-law. Apparently, this person has repeatedly witnessed the family scandals of the couple, and this time decided to record their quarrel, not suspecting that everything will end in a brutal murder. The audio recording clearly shows Luz Maria desperately screaming and crying for help, while in the background little Alice sobs in the background. Ada was horrified by what she heard. She stated that if that witness had called the police right away, her daughter might be alive right now. The man who made the recording not only did not call the police, but did not even visit the house from which the horrible screams were coming. The police also failed to trace the anonymous person, so it was not possible to involve him in the investigation as a witness. The audio recording was attached to the materials of the criminal case, and Ada gave a big interview, during which she called on all citizens to be vigilant and report to the police about the revealed facts of domestic violence, and not just to film them on camera or record them on a dictaphone. According to the woman, such simple actions will help save someone's life. This high-profile crime caused a widespread public outcry, and thousands of people took to the streets, staging rallies across the country to demand that the killer be punished. Although Jorge was taken into custody almost immediately, he continued to deny his guilt, saying that he personally drove his wife to work that fateful day, after which she disappeared. Street CCTV footage did indeed show the couple's car traveling in the direction of Luz Maria's workplace that morning. However, due to the tinted windows, it could not be clearly established how many people were in the car. Also, none of the recordings showed the car stopping and Luz Maria getting out of the cabin. The next curious discovery was made at the couple's rented home, where numerous washed-out traces of blood and drag marks were found. This suggested that this was where the brutal crime had taken place. Suspicions were confirmed when microscopic fragments of burnt flesh were found in the trunk of the family car. In addition, during the search, the investigator was interested in the recent purchase made by the couple, namely, a double orthopedic mattress. More precisely, not even the mattress itself, but the dense polyethylene in which it was wrapped. As the comparative analysis showed, It was in it that Jorge had packed the burnt remains of his wife. It was also possible to find several witnesses from among the neighbors of the family who repeatedly heard Jorge insulting his wife and threatening her with death. A few days before Luz Maria's sudden disappearance, her husband had shouted that he would kill her if she decided to leave him, and that he would hide her body so that no one would ever find it. The picture of the crime. Based on the data that managed to collect expert criminologists, as well as relying on the testimony of several witnesses, the investigation of the pieces restored the gruesome picture of the crime. The murder occurred on the night of January 19, 2021, the day before the spouses had a big fight, and Jorge again gave the will of his fists. He had problems with controlling outbursts of anger before, but this time he simply went into a rage. He hit his wife several times, causing her to scream and cry for help. It was these screams that the neighbors of the family heard, but did not call the police. In the process of beating, Jorge broke his wife's nose and also caused her a head injury. After that, he strangled her with his bare hands and then attempted to dispose of the corpse. To do so, he dragged the body out into the backyard, doused it with campfire liquid, and set it on fire. However, Jorge did not expect his funeral pyre to be so smoky and the stench of burning meat and hair to eat away at his eyes. He was afraid that the neighbors would notice it, suspect something wrong, and call the fire department or the police. So he quickly put out the fire, wrapped the burnt remains in plastic, and then went to find a secluded place where he thought the body would never be found. The most horrible thing was that Jorge committed all these atrocities in front of their young daughter, who, due to her age, although not fully, but understood what was happening. The child, who was 3.5 years old at the time, saw the beating and the crime, as evidenced by the child's cries and screams, which were also caught on tape. Jorge, who had some knowledge of forensics thanks to his wife's textbooks, which were in abundance in their home, tried to cover up the crime and establish an alibi. He found a stretch of road where there were no lights or video cameras and dumped his wife's body in a drainage sewer there, going unnoticed. The next morning, he drove to her place of work along the usual route, as if he had driven Luz Maria there, as he did every morning, and the next day he began to simulate an active search for his wife, calling her colleagues, acquaintances, and relatives. Trial and verdict. The criminal's lawyers delayed the trial as much as they could, and also tried to throw the investigation off track. They insisted that all the evidence and witness statements were circumstantial, and there was not a single piece of evidence that would unequivocally prove Jorge's guilt. Defense attorneys tried to get the detention changed to house arrest, and also argued that Jorge himself was deeply depressed by the fact that he was accused of killing the woman he loved and the mother of his child. However, the decisive evidence was the data obtained from Luz Maria's phone. All this time, the gadget was in her husband's possession, and on the first day after the crime, he sent from it several messages to different people, trying to create the appearance that Luz Maria is alive. Also, having tracked all the movements of the smartphone that day, it was clear that it was constantly in the same places as Jorge's phone. But the lawyers tried to turn this evidence in favor of their client, saying that he found his wife's phone and drove around the city with it in search of her. But no one could explain why Jorge was sending messages from it, as well as calling it from his own cell phone. Another proof of the defendant's guilt was the bruises and scratches on his body found on the day of his arrest. These marks were recorded by experts on photos and indicated that the victim had clearly resisted. The most vivid was a scratch on his neck, but only to find particles of Jorge's epithelium under the fingernails of the murdered could not be found because they were destroyed by fire. But despite the large number of controversial points, the prosecutor asked for the maximum possible punishment for the perpetrator. Court hearings and proceedings were repeatedly postponed due to the raging worldwide pandemic of coronavirus, but in October 2022, the defendant was finally found guilty of the brutal murder of his wife. The man was sentenced to 50 years in prison, although he himself did not admit his guilt. Custody of little Alice was given to her maternal grandparents, who admitted that now the main meaning of their lives is their granddaughter. Even the most enigmatic disappearances of people, which leave no trace, eventually find their explanations over time. Those missing either make contact themselves, or the police manage to dig deep enough to uncover the truth and solve the case. Unfortunately, unsolved crimes involving abductions and serious crimes do occur, though they are much rarer. However, sometimes the investigation is just one step away from a breakthrough, but for some reason, the full picture remains elusive. The case of a young Canadian woman named Alicia Ross, who vanished without a trace in the middle of the night from her own bedroom, would likely have remained unsolved. The police were unable to find either a body or any significant evidence, and as a result, the investigation merely stagnated, attempting to stitch together a case against an innocent person who was suspected from the start. It might have ended up that way had the criminal not turned himself in to the police. It's hard to determine whether a sudden onset of conscience or a mental disorder was the cause, though it was probably a combination of both. But let's start from the beginning and dissect this complex story with an unexpected twist. Who was Alicia Ross? Alicia Ross was born on February 8, 1980, in the Canadian city of Markham, in the province of Ontario. There is no information about her biological parents. It is only known that they relinquished their rights to the child, and she was adopted at a few months old by a couple named Marvin and Sharon Ross. Her adoptive parents surrounded her with love and care. They did everything to ensure that their daughter wanted for nothing and could fully develop her talents. When Alicia started school, her adoptive parents decided to divorce, but they maintained a friendly relationship and continued to participate together in their daughter's life. Soon, Sharon remarried, and her new husband, named Julius Forrest, treated the child as if she were his own daughter. The girl did well in school, excelled in drawing, and also had a passion for photography and loved discovering new cities and countries. After finishing school, she spent a year in Australia, where she traveled and enjoyed life before returning home and enrolling in university. In the summer of 2005, the 25-year-old Alicia went on a hiking trip in the mountains with her friends. She loved spending time in nature, away from the hustle and bustle of city life. There, she met a young man named Sean Hine, with whom she began a romantic relationship in early July. He was 4 years her senior. He was already 29 at the time, but the slight age difference did not bother the couple. At that time, Ross still lived in her adoptive parents' home, where she occupied the basement with a separate entrance, thus having her own space and living independently from her parents. On August 16th, the young woman, together with her adoptive mother and their dogs, went for a walk in the park. Alicia appeared happy and shared that she was expecting a promotion at work to the position of senior sales manager in the coming days. She was very proud, as she had been working hard for a long time, and her efforts were finally about to pay off. Additionally, the young woman talked to her mother about her boyfriend Sean, whom she had been dating for just over a month, but seemed deeply in love. Alicia hoped that this romance could develop into something more significant in the future, and expressed a desire to introduce her beau to her adoptive parents by arranging a family dinner. After the walk in the park, the mother headed home, and her daughter went on a date with her beloved, promising not to stay out late because she needed to get up early for work the next day, where her promotion was to be decided. The women said goodbye and went their separate ways. Sharon never saw her daughter alive again, the mysterious disappearance from her own home. That evening, after meeting with Sean, Alicia invited him to her house. They had a great time together, and close to midnight, the young man left for home. Alicia walked him to the gate, which served as a second exit from the yard. They kissed goodbye, and then he left, promising to call her as soon as he got home. Around midnight, as promised, Sean called his girlfriend, but she didn't pick up the phone. He wasn't overly concerned, thinking Alicia had simply fallen asleep since she had to get up early for work. However, the next morning, when he tried to call her again and she still didn't pick up, he became genuinely worried and contacted a mutual acquaintance who worked in the same office with Ross. From her, he he learned that Alicia hadn't come to work, and he immediately rushed to her house. On the morning of August 17th, Sharon and Julius were planning to play golf with friends, and they left the house around 10 o'clock. They noticed their daughter's car in the driveway but thought little of it, assuming a colleague had picked her up. So the couple went about their day. About half an hour later, Sean arrived at the Ross residence, and finding no sign of Alicia there, he called the police to report a person missing. He also immediately contacted Sharon, informing her of the situation. The couple, alarmed by the news, dropped everything and hurried home, where the police were already present by then. Thus, Sean Hine was the first person to notice the girl's disappearance and to inform the authorities. Moreover, he was the last person to see Alicia alive and well the evening before she vanished. According to him, they had said goodbye at the gate, where his car was parked around midnight, and she hadn't been in touch since then, with her whereabouts unknown. When Sharon and Julius approached the house, law enforcement was already there, inspecting the area and speaking with Sean, who had called them. The young man was visibly nervous and looked distraught. When the mother looked into Alicia's room, she immediately noticed that all her daughter's personal belongings, without which she never left the house, were in their places. Her purse, passport, driver's license, keys, cell phone, as well as her bank cards and cash, were all left in the room, indicating she wouldn't have gone anywhere, let alone left without them. The gate was open but not forced, suggesting that the missing person either let her abductor in herself or willingly left with someone from the yard. In the backyard, the police found some disorder. The lawn and flowers in one spot were trampled as if someone had fallen there. Also, a pair of cigarettes and the right sandal of the girl, one she had been wearing the evening before, were found on the ground, laid out in a straight line. Neither Alicia nor her parents smoked, so the cigarettes didn't belong to them, and Sean claimed he never smoked that particular brand, leaving it unclear to whom they belonged and why they were arranged in such a strange manner. The prime suspect. Sean was almost immediately considered the prime suspect. Firstly, he was noticeably nervous, and his account seemed somewhat confused and disjointed. Secondly, he was the first to report his girlfriend's disappearance to the police, even before speaking with her parents and confirming that they too had not seen her. Thus, he definitely knew she was missing. Additionally, law enforcement found biological traces on the girl's bed, belonging both to her and Sean. Based on this, the investigation speculated that Alicia might have denied Sean intimacy, and he decided to force her, then, trying to cover his tracks, staged her disappearance, which he likely caused by ending her life. When Sean was brought to the station, questioned, and the investigator's theory presented to him, the young man was stunned. He was dismayed to be the prime suspect and swore he would never harm his girlfriend as he loved her. He also admitted that they did indeed have intimate moments that evening, but insisted it was consensual. The missing girl's parents also had nothing bad to say about Sean. He hadn't argued with their daughter, hadn't mistreated her, and she spoke only well of him, their relationship progressing rapidly and quite happily, so much so that Alicia even hoped to have a future with him. Moreover, the Forreses noted that their daughter had no plans or reasons to leave. She was eagerly awaiting a promotion at her beloved job, and being a responsible person, she would never just leave everything behind. But even if some unforeseen circumstances had arisen, she would certainly have informed her parents and definitely would not have left without her documents, money, and phone. The police lacked sufficient evidence or grounds to detain Sean, and so after questioning him at the station, they released him. Nevertheless, law enforcement did not rule him out as a suspect and continued to keep an eye on the young man. Sean himself appeared depressed and very upset. The extensive search effort. The search for the missing woman commenced the day after her disappearance. Initially, a thorough inspection of the home and yard was conducted, and investigators closely examined the surrounding area and interviewed neighbors. However, no one reported hearing or seeing anything suspicious that night. Law enforcement theorized that the woman vanished sometime between midnight, when she said goodbye to Sean and sunrise, a time when the streets are usually quiet and deserted, making it difficult to find witnesses. Flyers with Alicia's photos were distributed throughout the city, listing phone numbers where people could provide any information about her whereabouts. The story of the missing woman was featured in the news and made headlines in popular publications, generating significant public interest and prompting hundreds of volunteers and concerned citizens to join the search. The police received dozens of calls daily related to the case. Although most information turned out to be false or mistaken, each tip and theory was investigated in the hope of finding any leads. The search area continually expanded, involving more people, and thorough checks were conducted in abandoned buildings, wooded areas, and wastelands. Sean also actively participated in the search efforts, despite still being the prime suspect. Feeling wronged, the young man turned to the media and gave a significant interview, where he shared how deeply he loved Alicia and displayed photos of them looking very happy together. He tearfully pleaded for help in the search, appearing utterly devastated by the situation. The search for Ross became one of the most extensive operations in Ontario's history. Every difficult-to-reach place, ravine, and marshy area was scoured, but no clues, leads, or even hints about the missing woman's location were found. Her parents also appealed to the public through the media, expressing their belief that their daughter was alive but being held against her will somewhere. They implored whoever had their daughter to let her return home unharmed and not to harm her in any way. Sean's unexpected arrest. The police leaned towards the theory that someone Alicia knew personally had abducted and possibly ended her life. This hypothesis was supported by the lack of signs of struggle, no evidence of forced entry, and the gate being left open, but no concrete leads were found. The cigarettes found on the ground bore only a heavily smeared fingerprint, which couldn't be identified. Investigators thoroughly checked Alicia's contacts and reviewed all calls and messages on her phone and email, yet nothing suspicious was uncovered. On the 6th day of the search, the case was officially reclassified as a criminal act, despite the lack of evidence, and Sean remained the prime suspect. Sean lived alone in his own house about 10 miles from Alicia's home. After realizing that public suspicion had intensified following his media appearance, he stopped participating in the search and refused to speak with the press. Investigators interviewed Sean 3 more times, but his story remained consistent. He was then offered a lie detector test, which he refused, convincing the police even more firmly that he was involved in the crime. 2 weeks after the disappearance, Sean was arrested on an unrelated charge. He was taken into custody late at night for driving under the influence and resisting arrest. Speculations arose that he was drowning his guilt in alcohol. Following Sean's arrest, Alicia's parents gave another interview, sharing that they had not personally known the young man and only knew about him through their daughter's accounts. They believed she was happy, but now Sharon considered the possibility that her daughter might have withheld certain details to avoid upsetting them, though she had planned to introduce her boyfriend to her family soon. Police interviewed Sean's neighbors to determine if they had noticed anything unusual recently, such as him disposing of large trash bags, behaving suspiciously, leaving unexpectedly, or cleaning his car. However, no significant information emerged from these inquiries. Detectives were left hoping that Sean might eventually confess to everything, an unexpected turn in the case. About a month after the disappearance of Alicia, the buzz surrounding her case began to fade gradually. The search continued, but it was no longer featured in newspapers or news broadcasts, and the investigation seemed to have hit a dead end. The only option left for law enforcement was to keep pressing Sean, hoping he would crack and confess to everything. Then a completely unexpected twist occurred in the case. On September 20th, 2005, more than a month after Ross disappeared, 31-year-old Daniel Sylvester, who lived nearby, called the police and confessed to ending the girl's life, pointing out where he had hidden her body. It's important to note that this man was never under suspicion, and the police had not considered him at all during their investigation. Initially, It seemed that the man simply craved fame and attention, and thus decided to take responsibility for the most notorious case in recent years. However, all doubts were dispelled when the police found the girl's body at the location he had indicated. Who is Daniel Sylvester? But let's first delve into who this new person of interest is, and why the police hadn't taken an interest in him earlier. Daniel Sylvester was an unemployed recluse living in his mother's house, which was adjacent to the Ross family home. Their properties were separated by overgrown shrubs, forming a virtually impenetrable barrier. Although the criminal and the victim had lived practically their whole lives side by side, they had never interacted before. Alicia had seen Daniel a few times on his property and considered him mentally unwell because of his odd behavior. Indeed, he had had serious socialization issues from an early age, never had friends, was mocked at school, and every attempt at forming relationships ended in complete failure, causing him to harbor a deep resentment towards all women. As a child, girls called him a loser and said they would never associate with someone like him. At the age of 8, Sylvester was diagnosed with socialized behavioral disorder and had been under continuous psychological care, although therapy didn't help much. In his teenage years, he confessed that he dreamt of suddenly attacking a girl and overpowering her. This thought excited him, but specialists were confident that such fantasies would remain just in his imagination. After finishing school, Daniel stopped attending therapy sessions, decided not to continue his education, and became a recluse. He lived in his mother's house, almost completely isolating himself from the outside world. He spent his days sitting in his room, often on adult websites, and occasionally ventured out in the evenings to secretly watch his neighbors, peeping into their windows. He especially enjoyed watching when someone was engaging in lovemaking. This spectacle excited him, yet Daniel remained a virgin well into his 30s, satisfying himself with solitary activities. The neighbors hardly ever saw him, and thus considered him a harmless guy, the mutilated body. Initially, Sylvester claimed that the girl's death was accidental, and he hid the body to avoid punishment. According to him, when he realized the girl showed no signs of life, he placed her in the trunk of his mother's car and drove about 50 miles out of town, hiding the body in a bushy ravine by the side of a country road. 3 weeks later, fearing that the body would be discovered, he moved it in the middle of the night even further away, to a deserted area. The body was found in the place Daniel indicated, thereby dispelling the last doubts about his guilt. However, the condition of the remains indicated that the girl had been dealt with extreme cruelty. The injuries were such that it looked as if she had been hit by a car. An autopsy showed that Alicia had nearly all her ribs broken, her neck, both arms, and also suffered extensive closed cranial trauma with internal bleeding. The exact cause of death could not be determined, but at least 3 injuries were incompatible with life. Forensic experts were shocked, as they had never encountered anything like it before. It was now necessary to clarify all the circumstances and chronology of events of that fateful evening to learn how exactly the girl received such injuries. The full picture and chronology of events. Initially, the convict claimed that he had an argument with his neighbor on a bush-covered path between their homes. At some point during the verbal altercation, she called him a loser, which angered him, and he struck the girl on the head. When she fell, he kicked her several times in the chest. When he realized she was not breathing, he decided to hide the body, and then moved it again when the search area expanded. However, something in his story did not add up. There were missing details and specifics. For instance, it was unclear what Daniel was doing at his neighbor's house at night, why they began arguing, what caused such a brutal beating, and why the evidence found at the scene was laid out in a straight line. Restoring the full picture of events was challenging, but law enforcement managed to do so. That evening, Sylvester went out to spy on his neighbors. He noticed that Alicia's boyfriend had come over, and he approached their house closely. As the couple was being intimate, he watched them from a window. Then he moved back to the bushes but did not leave. Closer to midnight, the lovers went outside and kissed by the gate, just a couple of feet away from the lurking neighbor. When Sean left, the girl returned to the yard and noticed Daniel. She became very angry, realizing that he had been spying on her and her boyfriend all this time. She started yelling at him, calling him a pervert, and demanded that he leave immediately. Finally, Ross called him a loser, after which she turned around and was about to go back into the house. But this last word acted as a trigger, because that's exactly what other girls had called him in childhood. Sylvester was filled with rage, punched the girl powerfully on the head, and knocked her to the ground. She tried to resist and grabbed her attacker's hair, but he began to choke her. When his grip loosened, Daniel quickly stood up and began kicking Alicia while she lay down. He mostly struck her chest, back, neck, and head. Forensic experts later counted 33 fractures on the victim's body and extensive internal bleeding. When the man realized that his neighbor was dead, he moved her body to his garage, stripped her naked, and then masturbated according to his statement to relieve tension. The examination confirmed that Sylvester did not violate the body. He then put the corpse in the trunk of his mother's car and took it to a secluded place outside the city. Upon returning home, the criminal took a shower, changed clothes, and behaved as if nothing had happened. His clothes, as well as the victim's belongings and the towels he used to clean the crime scene, were packed in trash bags and disposed of. The trial and sentence. The court proceedings for this case began only in April 2007, at which time new details were made public. The defendant confessed that he ended his neighbor's life, but he and his lawyer insisted that it was unintentional. Moreover, the defense demanded a psychiatric evaluation, noting that Daniel was ill and should not be held accountable for his actions, suggesting he be treated in a clinic instead of being incarcerated. However, the prosecution argued that despite his mental illness and issues with anger management, Sylvester acted with full awareness of the consequences of his actions. He mercilessly kicked the girl with full force, knowing that it would likely result in her death. Nevertheless, the ordered psychiatric evaluation confirmed that the defendant could indeed be fully responsible for his actions. Regarding the items found in the backyard, Daniel never confessed to having placed them there, arranged in a straight line. On May 7, 2007, the defendant was found guilty of second-degree crime and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 16 years. A year later, Canadian singer-songwriter Kathleen Edwards wrote a song titled Alicia Ross, which depicted the events from the young woman's perspective during the last minutes of her life. A nighttime stroll turns into a tragic crime. Going anywhere with someone you barely know is generally a bad idea that often ends poorly, especially when you're in a foreign city and the acquaintance was made just a couple of hours ago at a local entertainment venue. It's not necessarily, though not excluded, that the casual friend will turn out to be a maniac, assailant, or robber, but they might accidentally or intentionally draw you into troubles, or even lead to a disaster. An American student named Marisella Valadez planned to simply have a good time at a popular nightclub, where she unexpectedly met an aspiring rapper who showed interest in her and suggested they continue the evening in a more intimate setting. However, the new acquaintance was already in a relationship, and a complicated one at that. He was part of a rather unusual love triangle, and the other participants did not appreciate the sudden appearance of the young beauty. Her naive trust cost the young woman her life, but the case turned out to be anything but straightforward. It involved insane jealousy, the desire to cling to fading youth, occult practices, and even an international search for fugitive criminals. Nevertheless, thanks to the Herculean efforts of the investigators, it was possible to find all participants of the crime and establish the role of each. What is known about Marisella? Marisella Valadez was born in 1997 in Seattle, the largest city in the state of Washington. She was the eldest of 2 children in a family of Latin American descent, raised alongside her younger brother. People described her as a sweet, sociable young woman who always had many friends, performed well in school, and after graduating, became a student at a prestigious university. Furthermore, Marisella was considered truly beautiful, petite, slim brunette with big brown eyes, luxurious hair, and a flawless figure. She always had a host of admirers, loved being the center of attention, enjoyed lively parties where she could have fun, and cherished every day. On Saturday, October 3rd, 2020, the student flew to Dallas to meet up with old friends. However, by Monday morning, she planned to return. Her brother was supposed to meet her at the airport on October 5th, after which they would head to the university together, but the plane arrived without her. The search for the missing student. When all the passengers from the flight arriving from Dallas had left the airport, her brother realized that Marisella was not among them. Concerned, the young man tried to call his sister, but her phone was turned off. He then called their parents to inform them about the situation. Since Marisella was a serious and responsible young woman, it was out of character for her to disappear without warning and not show up for university classes. The family started calling her friends in Dallas, trying to find out where she might have gone and where she was last seen. It turned out that the night before, she had been partying at one of the city's most popular clubs, where she met a black man named Chuck. The pair danced, enjoyed themselves, and had alcoholic drinks, after which they disappeared together. Marisella was not seen again, and her phone went unanswered. The information seriously alarmed and frightened her parents, so they immediately decided to report her disappearance to the police. It turned out that the young woman had indeed bought tickets for a flight to Seattle, but for some reason she had not boarded the plane. No one had seen her since that night, and no one knew where she might be. It was necessary to find out who Marisella's new acquaintance was, where they had gone, and whether she had gone with him willingly. Examining footage from external surveillance cameras located around the club, law enforcement officers saw the missing student leaving with a young man whose face could not be clearly seen on the video. According to the footage, she appeared to be walking with him voluntarily. The pair got into a black Audi car and drove off in an unknown direction. The mysterious new friend. One of her missing friends mentioned that her companion was possibly named Chuck, but that information was insufficient. Soon, thanks to the street camera footage, it was possible to determine the direction the car had traveled. Additionally, it turned out that the pair had stopped at a supermarket, where they also appeared on camera footage. Both looked happy, smiling, and showing affection for each other. The young woman picked out several drinks and candies, and the young man paid for everything at the checkout using a card in the name of Charles Beltran. Thus, it became clear who Marisella had left with. Beltran was a 31-year-old musician and even considered a rising local rap star. However, the man had a criminal past, having been incarcerated twice for robbery and armed assault. He had served less than 3 years and was released on parole. Recently, the young man's career was on the rise, and he was even preparing to release his own music album. It was soon discovered where Charles lived, and by checking the cell phone carrier's data, it was revealed that the missing student's phone had been active at that fatal night's location. However, the house was owned by a woman named Lisa Dyke, and the musician was just renting a room from her. The very strange house. When police accompanied by an FBI agent assigned to investigate the girl's disappearance visited the address, the house was empty. They were only able to contact Lisa Dyke by phone as she claimed to be out of state on business. She confirmed that Charles Beltran had been renting a room in her home, but claimed that he moved out a couple of weeks ago, and she had no knowledge of his whereabouts since. Since law enforcement was unable to locate or contact the sole suspect, they obtained a warrant to search the house where he had lived. What awaited them inside was a collection of unexpected and frightening discoveries. The house was in chaos, with disorder and unsanitary conditions prevalent. It seemed as if the occupants had left in a hurry, taking only the most necessary items and leaving everything else scattered around. The kitchen sink was piled high with dirty dishes, moldy food remnants sat on the table, and trash littered the corners. Notably, amidst all this mess, numerous empty bottles of cleaning and detergent products were found scattered around, with traces on the floors and carpets, as if something had been thoroughly scrubbed. In one of the upstairs rooms, a peculiar and even sinister black statue of death, draped in a black cloak and holding a scythe, stood. It could have been mistaken for a quirky piece of decor, but it was set up as a sort of altar with wax candles, dried flowers, and 2 metal bowls. It resembled the Mexican religious cult of Santa Muerte, translated as Holy Death, where a female deity representing death is worshipped. The house and the atmosphere within seemed more than just strange. It felt as if something terrible had happened here, and afterward the occupants hurriedly cleaned up, packed the essentials, and simply fled. To ascertain this, a more thorough examination was conducted using special tools to detect traces of blood. This revealed numerous wiped bloodstains on the floor in one of the bedrooms, in the bathroom, and in the hallway. It was later discovered that the bedroom, where the carpet was practically soaked in blood, belonged to Charles, and it appeared that a violent crime had taken place there. But who was the victim? The missing girl, the tenant himself, or someone else? Despite all attempts to clean the traces, the blood had soaked into the covering, seeped under the baseboards, stained the wallpaper and furniture. Experts compared the found traces with Maricella's DNA, and any last doubts were dispelled. The blood belonged to the girl. The house was sealed as a crime scene, but now the task was to find the main suspect, possible accomplices, and witnesses. This task was not easy. As it turned out, Charles had fled, and the owner, even before the police visit, had hastily put the house up for sale. Therefore, the police decided to learn as much as possible about everyone who had recently lived in this house. The love triangle. Neighbors revealed that 3 people lived in the house: 57-year-old Lisa Dyke, 48-year-old Nina Morano, and 31-year-old Charles Beltran. However, the nature of their relationship and their sudden disappearance remained unclear. It was necessary to investigate each individual's background and find and interrogate them as soon as possible. The house owner, who was the only one reachable by phone, had worked many years as a lawyer, known as a commanding, ambitious, and quite contentious woman. She had been married 3 times, and after becoming a widow several years ago, received a substantial inheritance. There was no financial necessity for her to rent a room to some guy, nor was Lisa known for her charity, suggesting she had some other interest in the matter. The young black man named Charles, or simply Chuck, Beltran, dreamed of making it on the music scene to build a rap career, but he lacked both money and connections, and his criminal past hindered him. However, about a year ago, he met Dyke, who moved him into her house, helped set up a small recording studio there, and even sponsored the filming of several music videos for the aspiring rapper. Moreover, she even bought him a car, paid for his entertainment, and fashionable clothes, while insisting that their relationship was strictly business, and she saw great potential in this talented young man. The money she spent on him was an investment. The situation with Nina Morano was even more intriguing. She and Lisa had been in an intimate relationship for a long time, and after Dyke became a widow, she stopped hiding her affair with her lover. Moreover, several months ago, the women officially legalized their union by getting married. Nina moved into her spouse's house, where Charles was already living. According to a close friend of hers, Lisa had an intimate relationship with the young musician. Although she vehemently denied this, she secretly told her friend how amazing a lover he was. Apparently, she was in love with him because after their relationship began, Dyke desperately tried to look younger. She lost 55 pounds, changed her image, started wearing bright makeup, and even got several colorful tattoos. Most importantly, she evicted her own children from the home, who in her view were already grown enough and interfered with her personal life. Clearly, Chuck also had a vested interest in living with a wealthy, albeit older lover, as she solved all his financial problems and helped him build a music career. However, he was a noticeable, attractive man in good physical shape, so women did not ignore him. He often engaged in fleeting flings with young women, which drove Lisa insane with jealousy. But what role did Nina Morano play in this whole story, and specifically in the case of Marisella's disappearance? According to the same close friend, Lisa's spouse was part of this strange love triangle and was the only woman with whom Dyke not only allowed her young lover to sleep, but even insisted on it. Nina was also a successful lawyer and a very affluent woman. Thus, this trio lived in pleasure, sparing nothing. Interestingly, after their wedding, both women took the boy's last name, so the house was occupied by Charles, Lisa, and Nina Beltran. Where did the house's inhabitants vanish to? It was discovered that since the student's disappearance, no one had been seen at the house where her blood was found. Lisa was only contacted once. She answered a few questions, stated she was in another state, and thereafter her phone went unanswered. Nothing was known about the fate and whereabouts of Nina, as well as the main suspect, Charles. By tracking mobile phone signals, it was determined that on the night of October 5th, all three inhabitants, as well as the missing Marisella, were in the house. By early morning, their device signals had moved to a suburban area of Dallas, in a fairly deserted, wooded area. Then the signals disappeared, and a few days later, Lisa only responded from her second work phone, which later also became unreachable. The mutilated remains. Using geolocation data from the mobile devices, the route taken that night by the sought-after group was traced, and the stops they made were identified. It was presumed that somewhere in this area, they might have disposed of the missing student's body. This defined a broad search radius, but the area was vast and difficult to navigate, so progress was slow despite efforts. Closer to the new year, the search operation was halted as neither the body nor any clues were found. However, in March 2021, a local hunter wandering through the woods stumbled upon a human skull that appeared relatively fresh. He promptly reported his find to the police, and the remains were soon brought to a forensic laboratory for necessary examinations. Dental records confirmed that the body belonged to the Seattle student who had been missing for nearly half a year. However, the advanced state of decomposition and damage caused by wild animals made it impossible to establish the exact cause of death. Notably, several characteristic marks on the bones suggested knife wounds, but it was unclear whether these were the fatal injuries. The arrest of the first suspects. Soon after the grim discovery in the forest, authorities managed to track down Lisa, who had moved to Florida with Nina and rented a house in Miami by the ocean. Unfortunately, only Nina could be apprehended, while her spouse, learning about the situation, hurriedly went into hiding. There were no traces of Charles, although he periodically communicated with former girlfriends via messengers. In her last correspondence, Dyke mentioned that the young woman's body had been found and warned everyone to be extremely cautious as the police were on their trail. Nina, now incarcerated, refused to provide any information, claiming she knew nothing about Marisella's fate. Meanwhile, Lisa, using all her connections, attempted to hire a good lawyer for her spouse. It also emerged that while in Florida, Nina had put her house in South Carolina up for sale, trying to liquidate it as quickly as possible. It was likely that the women needed the money to continue hiding or to leave the country altogether. A month later, authorities successfully located and arrested Lisa, after which both women were transported back to Dallas. Initial interrogations yielded no results, and a bail of $500,000 was set for each suspect. They managed to post the significant amount and were released under house arrest. However, the women were fitted with tracking bracelets, which allowed their whereabouts to be monitored. A bold escape attempt. In August of the same year, police traced Charles to Utah, hiding at the house of one of his ex-girlfriends. The woman, who was raising a 5-year-old son fathered by Beltran, was so pleased that the child's father had returned to her that she didn't question the reasons for his unexpected decision. The arrested man initially refused to testify or cooperate with the police. He still hoped that his wealthy lover, using her money and connections, would hire a good lawyer for him and help him avoid prison, but soon the situation drastically changed. On Christmas Eve of December 2021, the tracking bracelets worn by Lisa and Nina, who had been released on bail, suddenly went offline. Due to holiday chaos and high activity, it took until the next day to send a squad to their location, but by then, the suspects were nowhere to be found. It soon turned out that they had been meticulously planning their escape for months, and by the time the police went after them, they had already illegally crossed the border into Mexico. From there, they flew to South Korea, and their trail was lost in Cambodia. The FBI was once again involved in the investigation, working with the Cambodian police and immigration services to track down the fugitive suspects. The women came under law enforcement's radar after withdrawing a large sum of money from an ATM. They tried to pay in cash everywhere to avoid revealing their whereabouts. ATM cameras helped identify the fugitives, and another camera on a neighboring building captured the license plate number of the car they arrived in. This information led to the driver, who took the police to the house rented by the extravagant foreigners. The women were rearrested and extradited to the U.S. in February 2022, where justice was to be served. This time, bail was denied, and they were sent directly to jail. Charles's candid confessions. By then, Chuck had fully realized that his lover was not going to save him from prison and was only concerned about herself, leading him to express a desire to cooperate with the investigation and start providing information. His account of the events of that dreadful night horrified many. Beltran confessed that he had been in an intimate relationship with the homeowner, Lisa, and her spouse, Nina. According to him, he engaged in these relationships for money and the opportunity to advance his music career. He harbored no warm feelings towards these women and often indulged in affairs with young and attractive women, which he never hid. While Nina was indifferent to his actions, Lisa sometimes became wildly jealous. On the fateful night of October 5th, 2020, Chuck met a young student named Marisella at a nightclub. The beautiful, slender girl immediately caught his attention, and it seemed he caught hers as well. After spending several hours drinking cocktails and dancing, he invited her over, and she agreed. When they arrived at his place late at night, Nina and Lisa were already asleep, so Charles easily took the girl to his room. There, the couple engaged in intimate activities and later fell asleep. According to the suspect, in the middle of the night, Lisa entered his room and, seeing the young beauty asleep next to him, flew into a jealous rage. She went to the kitchen to grab a large knife, then returned and leaped onto Marisella, repeatedly striking her. Charles claimed he was awakened by the noise and was disoriented at first, still somewhat intoxicated. When he finally turned on the light, he was confronted with a horrific scene. Maricella's body had slid to the floor next to the bed, where she had bled out. At that moment, Nina entered the room. They just stood there for a few minutes, and nobody attempted to help the victim. When Chuck regained his composure, he realized that the crime might be pinned on him since he had a criminal record, and his influential lovers could escape punishment. That's why, he said, he agreed to help dispose of the body and cover up the crime. Charles stayed with friends for several days, and when he returned to collect his belongings, he noticed that the blood stains on the floor and carpet had nearly disappeared. Lisa told him that she and Nina had taken care of everything and destroyed the evidence of the crime. Nevertheless, all three decided it was best to leave town for a while and watch from afar what would happen next. Lisa Dyke Beltran's version. Lisa's lawyer insisted that his client had no motive to attack the girl and take her life. She claimed that her relationship with Chuck was strictly business, and she viewed his promising music career as a good investment. Who he slept with or flirted with never concerned her. As a key argument, the defender pointed out that Dyke had recently entered into marriage and was happy with Moran. However, no one could explain why, after their wedding, the women suddenly decided to take the surname of the young lodger, who, according to them, meant nothing to them. At the trial, Lisa claimed that Charles was hot-tempered and very cruel, and when drunk, he became a beast, whom she feared. According to her, that night he brought a new girl from the club, But after they became intimate, an argument erupted, and Chuck, in a fit of rage, grabbed a knife. She and Nina ran to the noise and tried to separate the couple, but it was too late. Marisella was dead. They helped dispose of the body and clean up the scene under the threat of becoming his next victims. Witness testimonies. Lisa's friend, who testified in court, claimed that Lisa was literally obsessed with Chuck and had repeatedly confessed to her an uncontrollable desire to eliminate any girl who got close to her young lover. Clearly, she was unable to manage her emotions that night. Additionally, the witness mentioned the odd statue of Santa Muerte at her friend's house. She recalled being surprised by the improvised altar during a visit, but the homeowner jokingly claimed she was into black magic and knew how to cast a spell to ensure a man could only have eyes for her. However, it seems the ritual failed, and the woman resorted to using a knife. Another witness, a real estate agent approached by the women shortly after the incident, testified that they were eager to sell several properties they owned as quickly as possible. They also wanted to put their Dallas home on the market, but since it was the site of the alleged crime, they couldn't while the investigation was ongoing. The situation escalated when the remains of the missing girl were discovered, after which Lisa and Nina were ready to sell the property at half price just to get the money quickly. Trial and sentences. The court took into account Charles's full confession and his cooperation with the investigation. However, the situation for the fugitives worsened after their attempt to flee to another continent. In March 2023, Lisa Dite Beltran was found guilty of the brutal crime against 23-year-old Marisella, concealing evidence and attempting to flee. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As for Charles Beltran and Nina Morin, they fully admitted their guilt and agreed to cooperate with the investigation. They were only found guilty of concealing evidence. Nina was sentenced to 7 years in prison, but could be released in 3 years due to good behavior. Charles, previously convicted on multiple occasions, was sentenced to 12 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 8 years. In April 2015, the small town of Leeton in New South Wales, Australia, came to a standstill. Businesses closed, and the local high school suspended classes as the community was engulfed in sorrow and mourning, gathering to honor the memory of Stephanie Scott and offer condolences to her family. Over 1,000 people attended Stephanie's funeral, and a public memorial was organized for everyone to join in the communal grief. Many attendees wore Stephanie's favorite color, yellow, releasing yellow balloons into the sky, symbolizing the liberation of her spirit soaring into the heavens. The gathering prayed for Stephanie's eternal rest and comfort and healing for her loved ones. The song chosen for Stephanie and her fiancé Aaron's first wedding dance played, reminding everyone of the young couple's cruelly interrupted story, filling hearts with sadness and sorrow. Stephanie Scott, only 26 years old, was kind, intelligent, and always smiling. From childhood, she was curious and active, participating in school clubs and sports. As an adult, she followed in her father Robert's footsteps as a teacher, sharing his passion for education. She taught English and drama at Leeton High School, taking great pride in her work. Stephanie and Aaron, slightly younger than her, knew each other from a young age. They spent time together, shared interests, and played sports in their hometown. They were close friends until Aaron turned 21, when their relationship blossomed into romance. In early April 2015, Stephanie and Aaron were busily preparing for their wedding, scheduled for the 11th. Stephanie, a perfectionist, had spent months meticulously planning every detail. Almost everything was ready, with arrangements set and a honeymoon booked in Tahiti. She had recently celebrated her bachelorette party. The only remaining task was to rehearse their first dance, for which they had taken many lessons. The first weekend of April reminded them that their eagerly awaited day was almost upon them. Aaron invited Stephanie to join him at a party out of town, but she declined to finish some remaining tasks, including finalizing plans for her students during her honeymoon absence. On Easter Sunday, April 5, 2015, around 11 a.m., Stephanie Scott headed to her school in Leeton, New South Wales, to hand over some work to a deputy teacher. She parked her car on the street and walked to meet a colleague who lived nearby. Together, they opened the school gates and entered. Stephanie then locked the gates behind them and, with keys in hand, proceeded to the English teacher's office. There, she sent an email to a bus company confirming transportation arrangements for her wedding guests. After working for a couple more hours, feeling joyful that all her tasks were successfully completed, Stephanie left the administrative building and walked towards the gates. Aaron, aware that Stephanie had left and would be away for a few hours, grew worried as the evening approached. He had texted her the day before and received prompt replies. However, on April 5th, he received no response from Stephanie. Returning home after 7 p.m., Aaron found that Stephanie was still not back and her car was absent from the street. Trying to manage his anxiety, he reasoned that perhaps the stress of the upcoming wedding and leaving her students for an extended period had exhausted Stephanie, and she wanted some alone time. Yet, such complete silence was out of character for her. Even amidst the excitement of wedding planning, Stephanie had been enjoying every minute, eagerly sharing details about her dress and the wedding menu. She didn't appear nervous or depressed, but rather excited and ready for her big day. With his concern growing and sleep eluding him, Aaron texted Stephanie again in the morning before calling her family. More than a day had passed since Stephanie's disappearance, and Aaron went to the Leeton police station to report his missing fiancée. The police, after inspecting the vicinity and noting Stephanie's car's disappearance, speculated that she might have left the school and been involved in an accident or gotten stuck in a ditch or creek. Helicopters were deployed to search the area, while ground police headed straight to the last known location of Stephanie Leeton High School. Due to Easter Sunday and the limited number of people at the school, there were few witnesses, complicating the police investigation but also ruling out hundreds of potential suspects. A check of the school's alarm system in Stephanie's classroom revealed that she had deactivated it at 1:30 p.m. and reactivated it at 1:38 p.m. This provided the police with the precise time when Stephanie was nearby, but it was the only detail they could ascertain. Detectives attempted to use phone tracking, but Stephanie's mobile phone was turned off. The last activities on her bank accounts or social media were on Saturday, April 4th. Local news broadcasts began covering the story by April 7th, while hundreds in the small community eagerly sought any information about Stephanie. However, such behavior was completely uncharacteristic of Stephanie, and as each day passed with her wedding approaching, hope began to fade. Stephanie's mother, Marilyn, stated that if her daughter was not found within the next few hours, it likely meant something terrible had happened. A reporter from a local newspaper in Leeton reported that the police resumed searching the school. They spent most of the day using digital mapping technology to study the school's premises, and specifically marked the room where Stephanie worked on the day of her disappearance. A witness near Leeton High School on Easter Sunday mentioned hearing strange noises around 2 p.m., like rustling and dragging something on the ground. He recalled seeing Stephanie's car under a covered walkway, but didn't think much of it at the time. Later, her car disappeared. Another witness, a school employee, told detectives about an odd conversation he had with one of the school's cleaners the morning after Stephanie's disappearance. Amidst the rumors and anxious talk about the missing girl, the witness asked the cleaner when he last saw Stephanie, and he replied that he hadn't seen her on the day she disappeared. When asked if he thought Stephanie might have run away due to wedding stress, the man strangely and nervously laughed, which felt unsettling to the witness. Additionally, the witness noticed that the cleaner's face had scratches. The police decided to question him for additional information. This was 24-year-old Vincent Stanford. Detectives had a brief conversation with Vincent, who explained that he stopped by the school to take out the garbage bins, although he wasn't scheduled to work that day. He claimed he was there for a short time because he was in a hurry to buy groceries. Vincent asserted he didn't see Stephanie at that time and couldn't help, but wished them luck in their search. He added that he left the school after 3 p.m. to go to the store where he always shopped. The police contacted the store that Vincent claimed to visit, only to learn it was closed on the specified date. This meant Vincent had reasons to lie about the store, making him a suspect in the investigation. Investigators decided to conduct another thorough interrogation of Vincent and went to his home, where he lived with his mother. When they arrived, Vincent was not home. His mother allowed the police to search the house, where they found a set of keys on a red and white cord, matching the description of Stephanie Scott's keys. While the police were bagging evidence, Vincent arrived in his car. He was immediately detained, and his car was confiscated. In the back seat, they found several MDF panels, seemingly stained with blood. Police also noticed tire tracks in front of the house, not matching Vincent's vehicle. Additionally, a used condom was found on the ground, with its wrapper in the bedroom. They asked Vincent where he was on that day, and pointing to a camera on the front passenger seat, he said he was taking photos. Detectives asked for permission to view the camera, and Vincent agreed with a shrug. When the police turned on the camera, the first image they saw was a photo of a burnt woman's corpse lying in a wooded area. Vincent tried to explain it away as just shots from a movie he had filmed, thinking they were funny. However, the police realized these were actual crime scene photos, with Stephanie as the victim. Vincent Stanford, the cleaner at Leeton High School, was immediately arrested. His seized phone and laptop revealed many photos of young girls, both from Leeton High School and from the internet, as well as pictures of women he obviously stalked. This painted a grim picture of his behavior. Although Stephanie's body had not yet been found, Vincent was charged with her murder on April 9th. News of his arrest quickly spread. Vincent Stanford, 24, was detained in connection with Stephanie Scott's disappearance and presumed murder. During this time, a search team found Stephanie's car abandoned in a secluded area, 8 kilometers from where she was last seen. However, her body was still missing, and the search continued. Detectives worked to identify the location where the photos with the body were taken. On April 17th, 5 days after last seeing Stephanie, another witness came forward. He reported seeing a car near a canal around 4 p.m. on Easter Sunday. A man got out of the car and threw an object resembling a laptop into the water before driving away. The police soon retrieved the laptop from the canal bed, confirming it belonged to Stephanie. Meanwhile, divers continued to search for the slain schoolteacher's body in the New South Wales River area. Reporter Natalie Cooper, in a live broadcast, discussed the ongoing search for Stephanie's body. The 26-year-old schoolteacher's body was still missing. Police scoured fields and vineyards near where her red Mazda was found earlier in the week. Police divers also explored the canal in the area, retrieving a laptop believed to be Stephanie's. Cooper mentioned a shrine near the site visited by many that morning. The entire community was deeply saddened, regardless of personal acquaintance with Stephanie. Her family and fiancé visited the shrine the previous night, lighting candles, praying, and comforting each other in their grief. The reporter also noted that police were desperately searching for any sightings of a white vehicle, believed to be owned by Vincent Stanford, the suspect in Stephanie Scott's murder. Witnesses were urged to contact the police immediately. Meanwhile, Vincent, in custody, voluntarily approached the police, requesting to speak with them. He divulged all details to the detectives, including information on where to find Stephanie's body. According to Vincent, on the day of the incident, Stephanie was in the upstairs teacher's room working on a computer with the door to her office open. Vincent was cleaning garbage bins using a pressure vacuum and needed to take some bins upstairs. That's when he noticed Stephanie. Vincent told the detectives that he suddenly had the urge to kill her and quickly went home to fetch his special kit, including handcuffs, Viagra, a knife, and cleaning supplies. He also Googled information about bride violence en route. Returning, he found Stephanie packing up to leave. When she walked past him, she looked into his eyes and smiled, wishing him a happy Easter. That's when Vincent abruptly grabbed her and dragged her into a storeroom. Detectives reminded him of the scratches on his face they noticed during their first encounter and asked about their origin. It turned out some scratches were from Stephanie's microphone and others from her nails as she defended herself while he tried to kill her. Vincent described how he grabbed Stephanie from behind, covered her mouth with his right hand, and encircled her waist with his left hand before taking her to the storeroom. He shut the door and violently threw her to the ground, hitting her from left to right. After assaulting Stephanie, Vincent used the knife to kill her. He felt compelled to do so, admitting to harboring many brutal thoughts and schemes and having previously killed others. He speculated about having some psychological issues, clarifying that he harbored no hatred towards his victims, but simply enjoyed killing. Vincent then recalled feeling a hunger pang and decided to go home for a sandwich and coffee. Leaving Stephanie lying alone on the storeroom floor, he went to his car. After eating, he returned to the school, placed Stephanie's body in the trunk of her car, and drove her to his home, parking the car on the street. On Easter Monday, Vincent drove Stephanie's car with her body to a national park. There, he removed her body from the trunk and stripped it on the ground. He noticed many bruises and abrasions on Stephanie's face, including swelling on the right side and a bruise under her eye. He then decided to cover the body with branches and douse it with gasoline. He used a match to ignite the fire, which he discarded nearby. Vincent stayed briefly, taking several photos of Stephanie's body with his camera, then waited 5 minutes to ensure the fire was well lit before leaving. He abandoned Stephanie's car on a secluded country road and walked back to town. In response to detectives' questions about the brutal treatment of Stephanie, Vincent continued to deny such actions, although the officers knew it to be untrue. As a result, he faced additional charges of aggravated harm and physical injury to a woman. Investigators inquired why, in the photographs, the woman was undressed except for a bra. Vincent explained that he usually removes almost everything, leaving only the bra. He wasn't sure why he did this, possibly wanting a souvenir. He admitted taking Stephanie's bra. Regarding her earrings and wedding ring, Vincent claimed he didn't remember when he removed them from the woman, but likely threw them in a trash bin along with other items. In fact, Vincent had removed Stephanie's wedding and graduation rings and sent them to his twin brother Marcus, who lived in Adelaide. Marcus sold the rings and earrings at a jewelry store, then destroyed Stephanie's driver's license after taking a photograph of it. A 24-year-old man was arrested at his home in the Adelaide Hills around 7 a.m. Neighbors were shocked, but the next chapter in a murder case captivating the nation unfolded right on their doorstep. It was shocking and unsettling for their small street and community. Marcus, Vincent's identical twin, worked on a flower farm. His colleagues described him as very quiet and reserved, hardly interacting with them beyond work. During the trial, Marcus Stanford had no lawyer, and when the judge asked if there were any reasons he should not be sent to Leeton, he replied with a strong Dutch accent that he had never been there and did not need to go. However, the next morning, he was taken to Sydney under police escort and remained in custody. Stephanie's family was further devastated when the police announced a second arrest in Stephanie's case, Vincent's twin brother Marcus. Finally, the search for the missing Stephanie came to an end. In fact, while Vincent was still giving his confession, the police had already located Stephanie's body. A day before her wedding date, a burnt body of a woman was found in a national park 60 miles from Leeton Middle School. Detailed investigation revealed that Stephanie had been brutally beaten on the head with a total of 40 blows, causing her death. Additionally, she had been stabbed in the neck before her body was discarded and set on fire. Photographs found on Vincent's phone conclusively showed that they were of Stephanie. Vincent Stanford's guilt was undeniable, and both he and his brother Marcus were brought to trial. In court, events unfolded unexpectedly. Initially, Vincent denied his guilt, and the proceedings became uncertain. However, based on the presented evidence and police work, it was decided that the case could lead to a conviction. Psychological tests showed that Vincent was believed to be a serial killer, posing a danger. He displayed a lack of emotions and sympathy, was merciless and indifferent, often laughing and not taking the situation seriously. Several troubling moments from his biography came to light. Vincent Stanford was born in Australia, but his family moved to the Netherlands when he was 3 years old. They later returned to New South Wales. At age 7, he dreamt of committing a murder. At 12, he nearly strangled his teacher. Classmates called him a psychopath, and due to problems with violence and disobedience, he was sent to a behavior correction school. He said he could never adapt to society and was later placed in a psychiatric center where he was diagnosed with autism and oppositional defiant disorder. Vincent told the police that after being released, he tried to enter university or join the army but was rejected in both cases. Therefore, he worked at several different places before getting a job as a cleaner at Leeton Middle School. His initial contract was for 5 weeks but was then extended. While working at the school, he often hid in the women's restroom during student lunch breaks to watch them. Examining Vincent's mobile phone, detectives found he stalked girls at the school and 2 other women working in nearby shops before murdering Stephanie. Numerous photos of one young girl, about 2,000, were found on his phone. He also kept diary entries about her, following her home several times and noting when she left, trying to determine who else was inside. One entry read, "She's home alone at 15:40, enough time to abduct." He initially targeted this young girl, but when his plan failed because she left town, he turned his attention to Stephanie, who worked at the school. Upon careful examination of Vincent's car, it was found that stains on MDF panels confirmed the presence of Stephanie's DNA. Additionally, during a search inside the Stanford home, investigators found traces of Stephanie's blood on a knife, several condom packets, and her bra. After admitting guilt in selling Stephanie's rings, destroying evidence, and assisting Vincent in hiding facts, Vincent's twin brother Marcus was sentenced to 15 months in prison. The judge noted that Marcus's sentence did not include the possibility of early parole, as there is no such practice. Marcus was sentenced to 1 year and 3 months in prison for his involvement in Stephanie Scott's murder. The sentence was to end on September 9, 2016. Had Marcus not pleaded guilty, he would have been sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison. In October 2016, Marcus was released. Over 60 people signed a petition calling for an appeal of the court's decision regarding Marcus Stanford, describing it as pathetic. After his release from prison, Marcus briefly returned to Leeton, accompanied by his mother. However, the local community made it clear that his presence was unwelcome, and his current whereabouts remain unknown. Marcus has apologized for his actions since his release, claiming he will cause no further trouble and admitting his actions were truly foolish. He regrets his inability to change the past. Marcus wishes to have no contact with his brother Vincent and does not seek to establish any. The twins' father, Steve, expressed confusion and fear over Vincent's crimes and has no desire to communicate with him. He rules out the possibility of meeting Vincent and wants nothing to do with him. Steve stated he cannot comprehend why Vincent committed these crimes, and frankly, he does not intend to seek an answer. On the day before Stephanie's 28th birthday, Vincent Stanford was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder and 15 years for sexual violence under aggravating circumstances. Both sentences were effective from April 8, 2015. During the trial, Stephanie's mother, Marilyn, stated that Vincent was unable to cope with his own life and therefore took Stephanie's, depriving her of a chance at a happy future. They will never know the full extent of their daughter's suffering, but the knowledge that she suffered is too hard to bear. Thus, the family prefers to retreat from the public eye to mourn their beautiful girl and overcome their grief. In the future, Stephanie's relatives will not respond to questions, participate in interviews, or television programs. The day after the trial, the family planned to celebrate Stephanie's too short and amazing life on what would have been her 28th birthday, the second birthday they've celebrated without her. A tea party with mint cookies was scheduled for 3 p.m., and Stephanie's mother invited everyone to join. The Scott family also called for stricter screening and evaluation of school staff to prevent similar incidents in the future and reduce risks to students like those faced by Stephanie Scott. Tragically, more than a year after Stephanie's death, her father, Robert, died in a bizarre accident when a tree fell on him, leading to his death. He was buried near the same place where his daughter was interred. Having lost Stephanie, Aaron moved to Europe, hoping to heal his pain associated with New South Wales. 5 years after losing his beloved, Aaron met a new love and announced his engagement to a woman named Samantha. The community of Leeton was deeply affected by the tragic story of Stephanie Scott. She will never be forgotten, and her life story has been immortalized in books. Stephanie's family hopes that people will remember her and all her remarkable qualities, her passion for teaching, helping, and mentoring others. They believe Stephanie embodied all the good qualities of a human being and made a significant impact on many lives. In her memory, her loved ones encourage everyone to be kind to themselves and strive to do good in the world. Stephanie Scott's story leaves a profound mark that inspires everyone to live a life filled with caring for others. Unhealthy relationships with a cruel person and a narcissist never lead to anything good. It's crucial to realize this in time and break off such connections before a tragedy occurs. Emotional abuse is typically just the beginning and a prelude to physical violence, which the abuser will use to control and dominate their partner, suppress them, and create an atmosphere of constant oppression and fear. Our story today revolves around a popular Chinese blogger, Lamu, whose tragic end a few years ago shocked all of China. Lamu, a simple girl from a poor family, captivated a large audience with her kindness, sincerity, and boundless love for nature, and met a horrific end at the hands of her once loved partner. The most chilling part of this incident is that the assault on her was broadcast live, and thousands of followers could only watch helplessly. Who was Lamu? Lamu was born in 1990 in Yawa Tibetan and Qiang Autonomous Prefecture, Sichuan Province, China. She was the youngest of 3 children in a very poor family that barely made ends meet. She grew up with her older biological sister and stepbrother in a home shared with their parents and grandmother. Their family collected rare medicinal plants, which they sold in local pharmacies for a meager income. After completing only 3 grades, Lamu had to leave school to work with her family members and help support them. Along with the adults, she climbed high into the mountains, where at certain times and in special places, they could find the rarest herbs and flowers with healing properties. Lamu was well versed in these plants and had a sincere love for nature, admiring its beauty and generosity, and drawing strength and inspiration from the mountains. As social media popularity grew, she created her own account on a Chinese equivalent of TikTok. There, Lamu posted short videos showcasing her daily life, household activities, and the beauty of her native province. She called herself a mountain girl and had a deep affection for her work. Unlike many bloggers, she was not chasing fame. Fame found her. Her audience adored Lamu for her smile, purity, and almost childlike spontaneity. She never prepared content in advance, speaking her mind and feelings, and sometimes singing folk songs while showcasing the mountain landscapes. Lamu never used makeup or filters. Her hands and feet bore calluses, scratches, and scars, visibly evidencing the hard and long labor behind them. Gradually, Lamu's subscriber count grew, and not only locals but also tourists visiting the area began to recognize her. They referred to the blogger as that sweet mountain girl, offered warm words, expressed gratitude for her work, and asked for photos. Lamu was not proud of her fame, but she was delighted that her activities resonated with the audience and brought joy to others. In her youth, Lamu constantly went to the mountains with her parents and older sister, but as her sister grew up, got married, and moved to another province, and her parents, due to age, could no longer climb high or for long, Lamu took on all the work herself. She detailed to her followers the flora of the local area, explaining which specific flowers and herbs had what properties, how to collect them, and how to use them as food without accidentally harming the body. During certain seasons, Lamu could spend several weeks alone in the mountains, gathering medicinal plants. She showed how she set up camps for the night, cooked her meals over a campfire, shared local legends and beliefs, and returned with a large and heavy backpack that seemed to weigh more than she did. But this strong, brave, and hard-working beauty never elicited pity, because she glowed with happiness when engaging in her beloved activities in the mountains, despite returning tired, worn out, and with bloody calluses. Despite never complaining about her tough fate and hard daily labor, Lamu long avoided one topic. She did not discuss her personal life because she suffered for many years at the hands of her abusive husband, Tong Li, enduring beatings and humiliations, but she tried not to show that she was deeply unhappy. Who is Tong Li? Tong Li was also a native of Sichuan Province, born in 1990 into a simple and quite modest family. His parents adored their youngest son, indulging him from an early age, always striving to spoil and please him. At the age of 12, he quit school and started working as a courier, delivering groceries to local stores. He earned little but kept all the money to himself, not helping his family at all. Even then, the teenager began to show signs of greed, avarice, and narcissism. He believed the world revolved around him, that others owed him, but he owed nothing to anyone. Desperate to become wealthy, he was willing to do anything, even break the law. And that's precisely what happened. At 15, Tong left home, fell in with the wrong crowd, and began dealing in banned substances and petty theft, also dabbling in gambling, and took pride in getting away with it. He aimed to earn respect in the criminal underworld, become rich, and escape the poverty he grew up in. Sometime later, Lee's parents opened their own small spice and tea shop, investing all their efforts and resources into it. The business quickly took off, generating a decent income, and the family soon became well off by local standards. At that point, Tong decided to return home and offered to help expand and promote the family business. In reality, he just wanted to live off his relatives, who worked hard daily. Tong considered himself successful and wealthy, spending money on personal luxuries, boasting to friends about his expensive items, and behaving selfishly, even claiming the store's success as his own. Meanwhile, he kept in touch with local criminals, maintaining a separate under-the-table business with them. First, love. Tong and Lamu met when they were just 17. The young man was so enchanted by her beauty, kindness, and sincerity that he was head over heels in love. He courted her earnestly, giving gifts, and it seemed he was ready to change for her, become more mature and serious, and cut ties with the criminal world. The young and naive Lamu quickly fell for his charms, believing she had met her Prince Charming, with whom she would be happy. No one had ever courted her so diligently before, and no one had tried so hard to win her over. Soon, the young couple developed a romantic relationship that lasted almost 2 years before they decided to make it official. As soon as Tong turned 19, he proposed to his beloved, who eagerly accepted. However, their parents were not thrilled about their decision to marry. They tried to dissuade the young couple, believing they were too young to start a family, but the young lovers wouldn't listen to anyone. In 2009, they got married, and the newlywed wife moved into her mother-in-law's house. Lamu's personal hell. Initially, married life seemed quite blissful. Tong tried to be a good husband, left behind his bad influences and gambling, focusing on his young wife and the family business. Lamu took on almost all the household duties and also helped her beloved's parents in their shop. However, it wasn't long before her husband started disappearing with his old friends again. He returned to his unlawful activities, frequently consumed alcohol, and his behavior towards his wife drastically changed. Tong was no longer the gentle, kind, and caring man Lamu had fallen in love with a few years earlier. He became crude, self-centered, and aggressive. He took a portion of the store's earnings from a business where all the family members worked except for him, claiming it as his share, and spent all the money on his own needs, entertainments, and pleasures. The couple started arguing frequently. Lamu tried to reason with her husband, urging him to get his act together, work honestly, quit drinking, and stop associating with people from the criminal world. But Tong wouldn't listen to either his wife or his mother, believing no one had the right to tell him what to do. According to his parents' recollections, conflicts in their home became a daily occurrence. The situation didn't change even when Lamu became pregnant. Her husband continued to vanish with his friends, and when he returned home, he was rough and aggressive. He was annoyed that his wife was now more focused on herself and their future child. He himself, like a child, demanded attention, and during one disagreement, he raised his hand to her for the first time. Lamu was shocked by her husband's action and declared she would return to her parents' home, as she refused to tolerate such treatment. At that moment, her mother-in-law, who had unintentionally witnessed the incident, intervened. She approached her son and slapped him twice, telling him he had no right to treat the mother of his future child that way. Afterwards, the woman convinced her daughter-in-law to stay, promising that it would not happen again. Lamu believed her and decided to give her husband another chance, a decision she would bitterly regret, as it was just the beginning of a real nightmare. From then on, Tong regularly became physically abusive, only to apologize afterward, crying and begging her not to leave him. Each time, Lamu wanted to believe he had come to his senses and would genuinely change, but the cycle repeated over and over. When she finally decided to leave her husband, he threatened to take their son away and do something terrible to her and her parents. Frightened, the young mother stayed, fearing he would carry out his threats. From then on, their child became his main tool for manipulation and blackmail. Lamu told none of her relatives about the nightmare unfolding in her husband's home. Even her older sister, with whom she had been very close since childhood, suspected nothing. In 2012, after a long and severe illness, Lamu's mother passed away, which was a huge shock for her. Her elderly father and grandmother were left virtually helpless, and she found herself literally living between two homes, managing to maintain order, cook, and help with the household chores everywhere. Mountain Girl, a blog as an outlet. Meanwhile, Lamu continued to regularly climb the mountains for herbs to financially support both families. Only in the mountains, amidst the hard work, paradoxically, could she rest, be alone with her thoughts, and breathe freely without fear of her disgruntled husband coming home, causing a scene, and hitting her again. In 2017, the woman gave birth to a second son. Relations with her husband remained strained, and her mother-in-law had long stopped trying to intervene on her daughter-in-law's behalf, though she took on all the care of the grandchildren when Lamu went to work in the mountains. Around the same time, Lamu created her account on Douyin, Chinese TikTok, where she started posting short videos showcasing the local beauty, discussing various flowers and herbs, their medicinal properties, and how to use them. She quickly gained a large following who closely followed her, admired her work, and her extensive knowledge of traditional Chinese medicine. The budding blogger called herself Mountain Girl, and her followers dubbed her the Beauty from the Mountains. Engaging with her audience became the outlet Lamu desperately needed to keep from going insane. Sometimes, she quietly sang folk songs for her followers, and sometimes danced against the backdrop of mountain ridges. She always appeared happy, smiling genuinely, and never once complained to her audience about her difficult fate or mentioned the domestic violence she regularly endured. Divorce and remarriage. In 2019, Lamu's beloved grandmother passed away, and the blogger posted a video for the first time where she was crying, expressing her deep pain over losing a family member. Her numerous followers sincerely supported her, unlike her husband who, instead of showing sympathy, became furious and struck her face because she was sobbing. In January 2020, after enduring another severe incident of violence, Lamu finally decided to leave her tyrannical husband. She took her sons, moved back to her parents' home, and filed for divorce. Around the same time, Lamu recorded a new video stating that for the first time in a long while, she felt calm and confident. In the video, it was evident she tried to cover up a large bruise under her eye with concealer. However, she never disclosed to anyone the domestic abuse she had suffered for years. Regrettably, during the divorce proceedings, the court divided custody of the sons, leaving the younger child with the mother and the older with the father. This decision was a devastating blow for Lamu, and her now ex-husband unexpectedly changed tactics, romantically pursuing her again, proposing they start over and not break up the family. He swore he had realized his mistakes, wanted them and the boys to live together again, and promised to acknowledge all his past errors and never repeat them. For a couple of months, Tong put on the act of a repentant man. He gave flowers, created real celebrations for the family, tried to help his ex-wife around the house, and even joined her on mountain trips, which he had never done before. Lamu's heart softened, and she believed that he had genuinely changed. By the end of March, the couple remarried. Escape from the tyrant. As you might guess, the fairy tale ended as soon as Lamu returned to her husband's house. Tong reverted to being cruel, mean, and selfish, and within 2 weeks of remarrying, he brutally attacked his wife, nearly beating her to death. When Lamu interacted with her followers, he snatched the phone from her hands and hurled it against the wall, shattering it. Then he began to beat her with his fists and feet, giving her no chance to escape. Battered and barefoot, Lamu fled the house and immediately went to the police, seeking protection. But they only took her statement and advised her to try to resolve the family conflict on her own. After that, Lamu decided to hide from her husband in another village to avoid endangering her relatives. Enraged, her husband was ready to end the life of his runaway wife, but did not know where to find her. He assumed she might have gone to her sister's house. He visited the sister's home and began yelling, demanding she tell him where Lamu was. The woman knew nothing about it and asked him to leave. Then Tong repeatedly struck her in the face with all his might. At that moment, her husband was at work, so there was no one to protect the unfortunate woman. She suffered a fractured cheekbone and eye socket, and her nose was broken. After the second victim also filed a police report, Tong was finally held accountable administratively, but he was not arrested. Nevertheless, Tong laid low while the second divorce proceedings were underway, not attempting to contact his wife. Unfortunately, this time around, the court, in dissolving the marriage, left both sons with the father, as the Lee family was wealthy, and money proved to be the deciding factor. The heartbroken mother was crushed with grief. Her close ones urged her to leave the village for a while, fearing the ex-husband would seek revenge and possibly do something dreadful. However, Lamu refused, wanting to be near her boys. 3 weeks after the second divorce, Lamu went to the mountains where she recorded a video of herself singing and dancing. Apparently, this was her way of trying to relieve stress, but her ex-husband interpreted it as her celebrating their separation, which blinded him with rage. Tragic assault broadcast live. On the evening of September 14th, 2020, around 8 o'clock, Lamu started a live stream to chat with her followers. She was dressed in a traditional Tibetan outfit, softly singing folk songs. She put a finger to her lips, whispering that they needed to be quiet because her father and visiting stepbrother were already asleep while she prepared breakfast treats for them. At that moment, a terrible noise erupted off camera, as if someone had kicked the door in. The blogger turned pale, frozen in fear. Her eyes wide with horror, she stared at the person entering, then suddenly jumped up, clearly trying to escape. The tripod with her smartphone fell camera down, but the broadcast continued. Viewers could not see what was happening in the room, but could hear everything. Heavy footsteps were heard, followed by the sound of a liquid splashing on the floor and walls. Lamu started screaming for help. Then her father's voice pleaded with the intruder to calm down and put down the knife. Lamu warned her family that the room was doused in gasoline and begged them to save themselves. A sinister silence fell for a few seconds. Then the click of a lighter followed by a piercing scream was heard. The broadcast cut off as the crackle of flames spreading through the room intensified. Followers were in disbelief, unwilling to accept that they had witnessed a tragedy, with some even speculating it was a cruel prank. Unfortunately, the worst had occurred. Tong decided to brutally exact revenge on his ex-wife for daring to leave him. He rode a motorcycle to Lamu's house, bringing along a canister of gasoline and a large knife. Through the windows, he saw his ex-wife in the kitchen on the ground floor and kicked the door leading to the room. Tong caught Lamu off guard. She barely understood what was happening before she tried to flee, but he prevented her from escaping. Tong doused Lamu with fuel and wounded her with the knife before setting the house on fire. At that moment, her father and brother ran outside, shouting for neighbors to help, but they did not understand what was happening or the seriousness of the situation. As the flames erupted, her relatives rushed back into the house, but the old wooden beams, burning like torches, collapsed. blocking the entrance. Miraculous rescue and battle for life. It took firefighters about 2 hours to extinguish the fire. When they entered, they found Lamu in the room, her skin charred black and in places literally melted and stuck to the floor. Incredibly, Lamu was still breathing, with a faint pulse detectable. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors were horrified by her condition. Over 90% of her body surface was burned, and her lungs had nearly cooked from the heated air and smoke, but she desperately continued to fight for her life. She was in a deep coma, and her condition was deemed critical. Nevertheless, the city's burn center was prepared to help, but the treatment cost was a staggering $1,000,000, a sum her family could not afford after losing everything in the fire. Then, Lamu's father decided to seek help from her followers. He wrote a letter explaining that her ex-husband had attacked her, attempting to end her life, but she had survived, and doctors held out a slim hope. However, the family simply didn't have the funds for her medical treatment. The letter was posted on her social account, along with a plea from her sister to all compassionate people to help Lamu, providing an account number for donations. The necessary funds for treatment were raised within an hour of the post, and people continued to send money. Lamu was transferred to the burn center where she received the needed care. Her condition was stabilized, and at one point, it even seemed she might recover. However, tragically, after 2 weeks of fighting for her life, her heart could not endure any longer, and she passed away without regaining consciousness. She was only 30 years old. Trial and sentencing. Tong was arrested the day after committing this heinous act. At the trial, his mother desperately defended her son, who had inflicted such cruelty, claiming that he did it out of intense love for his ex-wife and stress from their divorce. Nevertheless, the verdict was severe and just. The court found Lee guilty of deliberate cruel deprivation of life and sentenced him to death, additionally mandating his family to compensate Lamu's relatives for the property loss due to the house fire. Tong attempted to appeal the verdict several times through appellate motions, but the decision remained unchanged. In July 2022, the sentence was carried out. Tong Lee was executed. That same year, 2 years after the tragic event that ended a young woman's life, her relatives rebuilt the house on the site of the burned one and were able to move back in. On the ground floor, her sister set up a small memorial altar with photographs of Lamu. In conclusion, the court left the orphaned boys in the custody of their paternal grandparents. The Lee family remained one of the wealthiest in the village, and the judges believed they could provide the children with better living conditions. In 2012, the family of one of the richest people in Brazil, businessman Marcos Matsunaga, became the center of attention after Marcos disappeared on the eve of a major billion-dollar deal. The case shocked the whole country, and photos of the inconsolable widow of the millionaire did not leave the front pages of the leading national publications. Initially, as the main version, the police considered the intrigues of competitors who could kidnap and get rid of the businessman in order to disrupt the upcoming deal. However, the revealed truth turned out to be much more cruel and terrible. The story of a cold-blooded murder and a monstrous attempt to cover up the crime formed the basis of several documentaries. Who is Marcos Matsunaga? Entrepreneur Marcos Matsunaga was one of the richest people in Brazil and ran a family business producing various food products, Yoki. The company was founded by Marcos's grandfather, who had once emigrated across the ocean. His name was Yoshizo Kitano, actually, from the first letters of the surname and first name of the founder, and the name of the brand was formed. The foundation of the future business empire was laid in the middle of the last century. It is noteworthy that it all started with a small flour milling enterprise, which managed not only to survive, but also thrive during the years of crisis and war, and then transformed into a huge company with a worldwide reputation and the widest range of products. Marcos was born into a wealthy family, and from an early age he knew no denial of anything. He did not have to build and develop his business from scratch, because he inherited everything that his grandfather and father had created, becoming the CEO of the family food company. He had every chance to become the first billionaire in his family, and he strived for this almost all his conscious life. But such grandiose plans were not destined to materialize. Everyone who was personally acquainted with Marcos characterized him as a good and quite talented businessman, who managed not only to save, but also to multiply the family capital, several times increasing profits. But he was not an easy man. Capricious, arrogant, with a heavy character, and a constant desire to control everyone who was near him. In addition, the businessman was far from handsome in appearance. He suffered from childhood overweight, had problems with vision, because of which he wore glasses, and he was also short in stature and somewhat clumsy. All this from an early age created a lot of problems for the boy when communicating with his peers. He had almost no friends and female representatives of the female sex, and it all shunned this strange and peculiar guy. Marcos, for a long time, all failed to build a long and serious relationship with anyone, because beyond a couple of dates, it did not go. Even his own business and multi-million-dollar inheritance did not make him an enviable and desirable bachelor. He repulsed women with his arrogance and egoism, so Marcos often used the services of escorts and representatives of the ancient profession. There is practically no information about the entrepreneur's first wife in open sources. It is only known that he did not marry out of great love or passion, but rather out of desperation and at the insistence of his relatives. Despite this, the marriage lasted several years, although both spouses almost immediately began to regret their decision to start a family. At first, the young wife tried to put up with the complex character of the businessman, hoping that in time they will manage to become a happy couple where both support and understand each other. But the young woman was wrong, and over the years they only increasingly distanced from each other. Also, Marcos constantly cheated on her and did not even try to hide it or somehow justify it. And he looked for mistresses mainly on websites where girls offered intimacy for money. Alice was one of those girls. She was an escort, and her portfolio was available on the relevant platforms. It was there that the businessman noticed a bright, attractive blonde with a beautiful figure and began to regularly invite her on dates, generously paying for them. Alice was 6 years younger than him. She was born and raised in a very poor and dysfunctional family living in one of the most crime-ridden areas of the city. Alice didn't know her own father. Her mother was a heavy drinker, and she was involved with men who shared her addiction. The girl had a hard and joyless childhood. At a very young age, she was repeatedly beaten, harassed, and abused by her mother's roommates. Barely finished school, Alice literally ran away from home and forever left the neighborhood in which she grew up. The girl took nursing courses, after which she got a job at a hospice. However, she soon realized that caring for dying patients is far from the limit of her dreams and abilities. In addition, sensitive and vulnerable young woman quickly became attached to people, and the death of each patient perceived as a personal tragedy. A few years later, Alice decided to get a higher education and completely change her occupation. Her choice fell on the law, which she considered a promising occupation, opening in life almost all the doors. She had long been preparing for admission, and was able to score the required number of points in the entrance exams, but to pay for her studies from her modest salary as a nurse, she could not. Alice had no one to help her, because she had severed all ties with her relatives after she left home. Then, young, pretty Alice, with a slender figure, decided to earn on her external data and registered on a site specializing in the provision of escort services. There she was helped to create a bright personal page, and soon wealthy men themselves began to show interest in the young blonde beauty. Escorting and providing intimate services brought Alice a good income, allowing her to pay for her studies and fully support herself. But she planned to leave this specific occupation as soon as she got her diploma and got a job in her specialty. During this period, Alice met Marcos, who became one of her regular customers. He was generous with gifts and met regularly with Alice without hiding from anyone. She knew that the businessman was married, but at the time, she couldn't have dreamed that one of the richest men in the country would leave his wife for her. The story of Alice Matsunaga was like a Cinderella tale. A poor girl from a disadvantaged family, engaged in providing escort services, meets a multi-millionaire who soon falls madly in love with her. Marcos really literally lost his head, but now it is impossible to say for sure whether Alice herself made efforts to do so. After about 6 months, Marcos realized that he wanted not just to date his new young mistress, but to be with her permanently. He, without a second thought and regret, filed for divorce from his first wife and began to present everyone Alice as his fiancée. For obvious reasons, the businessman did not want anyone to know about how he met his chosen one and what she earned a living. Therefore, the couple came up with a quite ordinary story of a casual acquaintance in a cafe and adhered to this version. Even the closest relatives and few friends of Marcos did not guess anything. However, Alice in the family Matsunaga received not too welcome. The parents of the entrepreneur guessed that this attractive young person put into action all her charm to fall in love with the rich but ugly Marcos. And now she was going to great lengths to pretend that she did not notice his hard character. Nevertheless, when Marcos announced his intention to divorce his first wife and marry Alice, no one strongly objected. The businessman arranged a lavish wedding in the traditional style, with a white dress, a large number of guests, and a huge tiered cake. After that, he moved his wife to his huge and luxurious mansion, where she became a full-fledged mistress. Matsunaga had long been known as an avid collector of expensive wines and rare weapons. For wines in his house was built a huge cellar, where the bottles were carefully sorted by year and country. And for weapons, the house had a secret room, on the walls of which from floor to ceiling flaunted firearms and edged weapons. Marcos was very proud of his collections and was constantly engaged in their replenishment. However, in addition, his house was literally full of antiques, luxury goods, and modern art, which tastelessly hung on the walls and stood literally on all surfaces. Soon after the wedding, the couple decided that they were ready to have an heir, but despite all their efforts, Alice for a long time did not get pregnant naturally. Then the couple decided to resort to the procedure of in vitro fertilization, but even here success awaited them far from immediately. When their common daughter was born, it seemed that the happiness of the couple now has no limits. The young parents were engaged in the education of the long-awaited baby girl, made plans for the future, and when the girl grew up a little, the whole family began to travel the world, getting acquainted with different cultures and traditions. Their daughter was a real little princess who was brought up in love, care, and luxury. But the couple had one very specific common hobby: hunting large animals. Although it would be more correct to say that it was always a hobby of Marcos, who at different times tried to join it to his chosen women and his first wife. But most women did not just dislike this activity, it frankly repulsed them. The businessman no longer hoped that he would meet someone who would share his passion. Now many believe that Alice became interested in hunting to win even more favor Marcos and conquer his heart. At first, they visited shooting ranges together, where Alice learned how to handle different types of firearms, and afterward they went into the woods together to hunt wild animals. Alice felt no pity when she took the lives of animals and treated it as a kind of competition. Either you do it or you don't. Marcos liked this approach, and he liked to watch his wife handle her weapons and stalk her prey. He also taught her how to skin and carve wild boars, deer, and other forest creatures. Together they skinned them and separated body parts using large knives, special cleavers, and axes. In addition, the family did not have cats or dogs as pets, but poisonous snakes for which special terrariums were built, with conditions as close as possible to their natural habitat. It was the realization of another long-time dream of Marcos, who adored snakes, but his first wife did not approve of the idea of having a home terrarium. Alice had really bought Marcos off by sharing his rather strange hobbies. In the spring of 2012, the entrepreneur was preparing to make perhaps the main deal of his life and career, which would make him a billionaire and take his income to a whole new level. He was actively negotiating with several business partners, going to sell the family company, and the proceeds of the huge sum of money to invest in a new profitable business. At home at this time, Matsunaga rarely appeared because he was completely absorbed in work and the realization of his grandiose plans. He and his wife moved into an elite apartment complex located in the business center of the city, not far from the main office of the businessman's company. Marcos was away almost all the time, while his young wife was bored alone in a luxurious apartment with a panoramic view of the city. The businessman's work schedule was scheduled literally by the minute. He was lost in meetings, business meetings, and consultations with specialists. Often he did not even spend the night at home, but promised his wife that as soon as the deal was done, their lives would be completely changed and transformed. On May 19, 2012, on the eve of the deal for $1 billion, the entrepreneur disappeared without a trace. His wife reported the incident only the next day because she believed that Marcos at work. According to Alice, in the evening he was scheduled a meeting, which could last into the night, and early in the morning, her husband was to meet with a business partner, so he took some things, warned that most likely to spend the night in the office, and then go straight to the deal. When the next day Marcos did not return home and stopped answering his phone, Alice became concerned and reported him missing. The police immediately found out that the entrepreneur did not show up for a meeting in the evening or an important meeting in the morning, which he simply could not miss. In this regard, there was immediately a version that the millionaire was kidnapped, and most likely, his family in the coming hours will receive ransom demands. But 24 hours passed. Then the second, no ransom demands were received, and hopes that Matsunaga was still alive were literally melting before our eyes. Investigators at this time did not sit idle and began to question relatives, friends, and business partners of the businessman, trying to find out whether he had enemies and who could be beneficial to his disappearance or the disruption of the upcoming deal. However, despite all efforts, it was not possible to find a specific person or people who might have wished the death of the businessman. He ran his business competently, was able to prioritize and plan his steps ahead, so that his strategic decisions made almost everyone always benefited. A few days later, after taking her little daughter, Alice came to the home of her father-in-law and mother-in-law to tell what she had not dared to tell the police. The young woman with tears in her eyes said that her husband has long been cheating on her with a girl named Natasha Villarreal Lima and did not hide it. True, after several major quarrels and threats to divorce, Marcos promised that he would leave the mistress for the sake of preserving the family. In fact, the man did not stop meeting with Natasha, but began to do it more carefully, so as not to provoke another family scandals. The wife guessed everything and decided to hire a private detective to gather evidence of the businessman's infidelity. Alice had photographs and videos of her husband on romantic dates with the same Natasha. It was noteworthy that he took his new girlfriend to the same restaurants and entertainment venues that he and his wife frequented and where everyone knew him. Marcos seemed to demonstrate to others how much he disdained his wife and can openly cheat on her without hiding from anyone. As it later turned out, Natasha Lima businessman found on the same site escort services where he once met Alice. They met for about 5 months, and during that time he gave her an expensive car and also paid a large sum of money for Natasha to remove her profile from the site. The available photos and videos proving her husband's cheating, the daughter-in-law presented to Marcos's parents. She also added that she had shown all this to Marcos the day before his disappearance, but instead of making excuses and asking for forgiveness, he simply packed his things, told his wife that he was leaving her, and then left their apartment and disappeared without a trace. Based on Alice's story, her husband, giving in to passion, simply decided to run away with a new mistress. But everyone who knew Matsunaga unanimously asserted that he could not just leave the business and disappear because he was too serious about the business, which for decades built his family. Answers to many questions were found about a week later, when in a deserted area, 100 kilometers from the house of the businessman, a passerby found scattered garbage bags, inside which were the remains of a human body. The man immediately reported the gruesome discovery to the police, and it soon became clear that the victim was Marcus Matsunaga, who was searched for all over the country. Experts determined that the businessman was killed by a shot to the head, after which his body was dismembered, packed into garbage bags, and taken to the outskirts of the city. It was noteworthy that the murderer, according to the pathologists, was either a surgeon or an experienced butcher who was proficient with a carving knife. Such a conclusion was inevitable, based on how accurately and professionally the cuts were made in the right places to separate the body parts from each other. At the first stage of the investigation did not have any concrete leads, so it was decided to start the investigation from the place where the deceased man was last seen alive. elite residential complex where Marcos lived with his wife and daughter was equipped with numerous video surveillance cameras, the records of which began to be scrutinized. It turned out that the evening before the disappearance, the couple ordered food delivery home. On the recordings of the camera in the elevator was seen as Marcos goes down to the first floor and then comes back with boxes of pizza in his hands. He enters his apartment and never leaves it again, not that evening, not at night, and not the next day. Matsunaga seems to disappear into his own home, but in the morning his wife leaves the apartment with 3 large wheeled suitcases. The footage shows that the suitcases are very heavy, and she moves them with great difficulty. The investigators had already guessed what kind of luggage it was. On the same day, the businessman's widow was taken into custody and brought to the police station to testify. At first, she tried to deny everything and stuck to the initial version that her husband had left her for a mistress. But when she was shown the elevator footage, she burst into tears and started talking. According to Alice, their family life has long since broken down, and from the former idyll is not left a trace. Her husband humiliated her, constantly reproached her with the work in the escort, saying that he pulled her out of the mud and also stated that she was a bad mother for their daughter. He also tried to control literally every move his wife made, not allowing her to make friends. When Alice once raised the topic of divorce, Marcos laughed and replied that he would leave her with nothing, take the child, and forbid her to see him. Alice said that on that fateful evening she showed her husband received from the detective pictures, which were captured Marcos with his mistress, but he only made him angry. He slapped his wife, and then, according to her, everything was as if in a fog. Alice does not remember how she got a gun in her hands, from which she shot her husband, and later, realizing what had happened, she decided to dispose of the body, making it look as if he disappeared without a trace. Alice had experience as a nurse and was familiar with human anatomy, and her husband had taught her how to skin and cut up animal carcasses, for which they had the necessary tools at home. All that followed was a matter of technique. While Alice was cutting up and bagging her husband's body, their young daughter was sleeping peacefully in the next room. From the beginning, Alice's testimony raised many doubts and questions. In addition, it soon became clear that the very pictures and videos proving Marcos's cheating, his wife received from the hands of a private detective only on May 20th, that is, after she had killed her husband. Then, as I said, Alice took these photos and videos to the parents of the businessman, saying that Marcos had abandoned her by running away with his mistress. We also managed to find Natasha Lima, who appeared in court as a witness. According to her, Marcos himself wanted a divorce, but frankly afraid of his wife, saying that she was mentally unstable and capable of terrible things. The last time Natasha saw her lover the day before his disappearance, he complained about the constant scandals in the family and said that after the sale of the company is going to move to live in Florida, where he plans to establish a new company. Taking Alice with him was not part of his plans. He was going to divorce her and forget her like a terrible dream. Another terrible discovery was the discovery by experts of blood in the lungs of the dead man, which indicated that Marcos was still alive and trying to breathe when his wife separated his head from the body. This is wild and horrifying. Alice herself vehemently denied this, insisting that he died instantly from a bullet. The pathologist also found that the same bullet entered Marcos's head at a rather odd angle, as if he was sitting or lying down, not expecting to be shot. So he didn't even try to defend himself or dodge. This contradicted Alice's account of her husband attacking her and her trying to defend herself. On top of that, almost all the witnesses who testified at the trial denied that Matsunaga could have hit his wife. Yes, he had a difficult character, could say various hurtful words, but in life never raised a hand on anyone. Everything looked as if Alice herself made up this episode, because Marcos could not refute anything. As a result, the court found Alice guilty of premeditated murder with particular cruelty and attempting to conceal the crime. Alice Matsunaga was sentenced to 20 years in prison, which many considered an extremely lenient punishment for such a crime. The parents of the deceased man are now responsible for the upbringing of their daughter.